I'd like to call the Williamsburg City Council work session meeting of Monday, August 10th to order. Ms. Felica, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Pons.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Here.
Mr. Maslin.
Here.
Thank you. So that takes us to item number 3. And first we have council preview. Mr. Trivett.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So for Thursday, we've got a few items on the agenda. We're going to start with some public hearings. The first one is to vacate a right-of-way over on Pocahontas Street. The second one has to do with some general fund work, including setting the rates for EMS reimbursement, as well as allocating some funds that were unanticipated revenue. And then under unfinished business, we have the fire station item. Under new business, we will hear from Sam Jones regarding William & Mary's Path Forward plan for the return of students to Williamsburg. He'll be joining us virtually. We have a lease agreement with William & Mary Real Estate Foundation for 26 parking spaces associated with their use of 332 North Henry Street. We're going to be taking another look at the ordinance associated with the Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court fee schedule that we did last month. There are 2 leases associated with cell tower equipment on the city's water tower. And then we have a couple of contracts that are over $100,000 that require city council approval. The first has to do with upgrading the broadcast capabilities in the Stryker Center. And the second one has to do with the purchase of a mobile stage.
Excellent. So that takes us to item B, which is a public comment opportunity for anybody in the audience that wishes to speak. I do have some speakers cards. I'll go ahead and call these now, knowing that some may want to speak later, and if you wanted to speak during the open forum, just let me know and I'll set your card aside. So first, I have William Byrd. Later. Next is Frederica Tuta. Hope I said that right. Close.
Sorry.
I try all the time.
Yes, thank you for trying. Yeah. Greetings, Mayor and City Council members. Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Vermont, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, of course, North Carolina, Florida, Kentucky, Ohio, Louisiana, Missouri, California. And the last week, these are the license plates on cars appearing by student rentals in the neighborhood of Griffin Avenue, Idlewood, Newport Avenue, south boundary. People between ages of 2 months and 90 live on these blocks. I am concerned about the well-being of all the residents in Williamsburg, babies and students, old and young. The college is primarily focused on monitoring and protecting students on campus. Many of us in town want the City Council to step forward and focus on what happens off campus in our midst. For instance, the college announced that it would mail to all students COVID-19 sample test kits, requiring that they show negative results before students can come on campus, and that if positive, they self-isolate either at home or off campus. Have these tests gone out, returned, and been negative for all the off-campus students already here? Who will be monitoring those who tested positive to make sure they stay quarantined in their rental houses until they test negative? These are extraordinary times that require exceptional responses. The City Council, I would like to consider enhanced measures to protect all their constituents. Here are some proposals. There may be others that similar college communities to ours have devised, and I hope that the city is having conversations with them for innovative ideas. Restrict gatherings to 10 people unless prior approval is given by the city, e.g. religious services, dining outside on Duke of Gloucester Street, Williamsburg Farmers Market. All of those have gotten approval. Shift beginning time of noise ordinance to 7 p.m. from what it is now, 11 p.m. Urge all landlords, some do, to put clauses in their lease that if 3 complaints are received about violations of city ordinances, renters will be evicted. Encourage landlords to allow renters to break leases without penalty should the college close down. Make mask wearing mandatory outdoors in public. To be clear, the primary benefit of wearing a mask is preventing the spread of the disease from the wearer to those around her. There seems to be some confusion about this, as a recent email from the mayor informed us that our best defense against being infected from students was for us to wear masks. It is just the opposite. When wearing a mask, I'm individually exercising a communal responsibility to safeguard others from possible contagion from me. President Rowe at the college's town hall meeting last Wednesday had this right in emphasizing our coming together to protect each other from COVID-19. However, she seemed to think that William and Mary students are the ones to teach Williamsburg residents how to be responsible community members and following proper health safety practices. As a Williamsburg Farmers Market board member, I invite her to volunteer at our Saturday market to witness the city community's near universal compliance with our COVID-19 protocols, including wearing masks while in the outdoor public space at the market. Thank you, City Manager Trivett and city staff, for your support and guidance in aiding the Williamsburg Farmers Market to reopen safely and successfully on Duke of Gloucester Street. I believe that this kind of collaboration in establishing extraordinary measures will contribute to keeping residents healthy and to preventing Williamsburg from making it into the news as a hotspot of COVID-19 outbreak. None of us want to see that. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Next, I have David Stansberry.
My name is David Stansberry. I'm the Vice President of the Williamsburg Volunteer Fire Department, and I'm here today to share the board of the Volunteer Fire Department's position on Station 2, which we'll be discussing later on, in a letter that we have drafted. Dear Mayor Pons, Vice Mayor Dent, City Council members Ramsey, Maslin, and Rogers. We, the Board of Directors of the Williamsburg Volunteer Fire Department, write to you in full support of the immediate construction of the second fire station, which is planned for 912 Capitol Landing Road. As evidenced by a third-party study, which was conducted in 2018, and the exhaustive analysis and modeling by the city's own GIS department, it was determined that a second fire station was the only solution that will improve response times of critical emergency services to an underserved population of our city. As each of you are aware, and many of the citizens of our community know, on March 14th, 2019, a motion was made by Councilmember Barbara Ramsey and seconded by then Vice Mayor Doug Pons for the construction of the second fire station at 912 Capitol Landing Road and renovation of Station 1 on Lafayette Street. The motion was approved by a unanimous vote by the entire City Council at that time. Then and now, the Williamsburg Volunteer Fire Department fully supports that decision. We all strive to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Building Fire Station 2 now will afford the numerous residents, businesses, and visitors with timely access to critical emergency services that they don't have today. Simply stated, Fire Station 2 at 912 Capitol Landing Road is not a nice-to-have project. Rather, Fire Station 2 is a need-to-have public safety resource. We are serious about providing all citizens with the same level of service, no matter where they live or work in our community. We must take this opportunity to apply the funds that were borrowed and approved for the construction of Fire Station 2 and act now to begin construction. Building Station 2 will not take services away from any area of our city. Instead, Building Station 2 will allow those higher risk and higher density areas such as apartment complexes, an assisted living facility, businesses, and older neighborhoods, the same level of service that each of you enjoy at your homes and businesses today. Many of the areas and buildings that will be within the first due response area of Fire Station 2 were constructed prior to the latest building codes and do not have sprinkler or other fire suppression systems. Additionally, the evolution of newer neighborhoods has increased response needs along the Capitol Landing Road corridor. The city's strategic decision to attract more businesses along Capitol Landing Road will ultimately increase the demand for more public safety services in that area. The immediate addition of a second fire station at 912 Capitol Landing Road and the subsequent renovation of the current fire station on Lafayette Street will greatly improve response times of fire and emergency medical services while significantly enhancing Williamsburg's goals specific to community risk reduction. As a stakeholder organization, the Williamsburg Volunteer Fire Department will always strive to provide world-class service to each and every individual we have the honor to serve. However, we need your help and commitment to building Fire Station 2 now so we can continue to grow and serve our community. Williamsburg Volunteer Fire Department respectfully requests the City Council take whatever action is necessary to immediately begin construction of Fire Station 2, which was approved on March 14, 2019. Thank you in advance for your deliberate and fact-based actions related to this matter. We look forward to continuing to work with the fire chief and the community to ensure equal and timely access to emergency services for all. Thank you from the Williamsburg Volunteer Fire Department Board of Directors.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, I have Gary Plagg. Okay. Dr. Crambuel? Okay. Cecil Morrow. Come up and state your name and address for the record, please. I'd appreciate it.
Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, council members, my name is Cecil Morrow, resident 285 Merrimack Trail, Shelley Square Townhomes. I am the president also of the association, and I couldn't come in a better time to follow the gentleman who made his presentation. I'm too here for the decision on the billing of Fire Station 2. It was about 5 years ago, my wife and I was having dinner, the dryer was going and there was a popping sound, and I said, "What is that?" Moments later, there was smoke, and I went in and opened the laundry room and the dryer was smoking. So I immediately said, "Call the fire department." And what turned out to be, seemed to be a decade before I got a response, even though the fire department finally got there, and fortunately it wasn't a serious matter. But how, when I read in the paper that there was a consideration for Station 2 over in the Capitol Landing Court-Off, how it resonated back with me about the response time of that situation that occurred 5 years ago. I come to stand before you today to say that it's definitely an area that needs solid concentration. As the gentleman just spoke about the high density of the residents in that area. Being an association involved in the homeowners association, as I can relate to, there's 4 apartment complexes, as well as 3 townhomes, condos association, just on Merrimack Trail alone, not to mention neighboring Parkway, and then a cluster homes up in the Brandywine, as well as the assisted living across the street. Again, I cannot echo more than what the gentleman just before me presented to this council in regards to the desperate need of looking at the need for Station 2. I was somewhat set back when I read and realized that a consideration was being focused on more on the current station than that of Station 2, and I stand again before you to ask that you will strongly take it into consideration. Again, I don't have that data before you to present to you of the residents in those apartment complexes as well as townhomes and condos, but that area is definitely, and not to mention even the access as constantly on Merrimack Trail, constantly there, sirens going all the time of fire responding going out to 64. So being that close to the great need of a response for 64, I think would be definitely a strong area of concern as well. So I trust and put all the, that you all will take it into great consideration. So that's my submission.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming forward. Next, we have the Honorable Joel Whitley. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Joel Whitley. I live at 405 Zelkover Road, and that's in Williamsburg. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, citizens of Williamsburg, of our community, I come before you to tell you that I support the fire station being developed over on Capitol Landing Road. The reasons are obviously been studied, and I had no further data to present other than what has been presented when the council passed this motion last year. So for my community, I'm not speaking for my community, but from my community at Zelkover Road, I support the fire station being on Capitol Landing Road. Along with that, I believe the plans are to develop Capitol Landing Road into a culinary avenue. I don't know if that's still in place. And also, I believe that we're supposed to do the roadway of Capitol Landing Road to match 2nd Street. So I'm looking forward to that coming about. And thirdly, that's it. I won't hold you up any longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming forward.
Thank you.
That's all the speakers cards I have. Yes, sir. Please come forward. State your name for the record. Mr. Byrd.
Good evening. My name is William Byrd. I live at 529 Burbank Street, Highland Park subdivision. Thank you for allowing me to come to speak this evening. I was informed of the station on Capitol Landing Road. Being a retired firefighter, I understand response time. It's very important. Living on the other side of the track and have been experienced with a fire at my own home, I understand those responses coming across, and with the train being there, it lengthens the time of response. Very good idea to put a station on Capitol Landing Road. I heard it has been approved back last year, and I would like to see the City Council follow through with that. We have an elderly population in Highland Park. You're looking at a lot of people on that side of town, the growth there, Spring Arbor, and it would be very beneficial to that side of town for response. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming forward. And if anybody else would like to come forward? Yes, sir. State your name for the record and address. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I have a question. I agree with everything Frederica said. Duncan Sutherland on 512 Newport. Have you, as a council or the other city administration, been talking with the college about what will happen if, God forbid, we have a major outbreak and students are just not able to go on campus? And how are we going to handle that in the city? So are you aware, are you talking to them about that contingency plan you're aware of? Because I think watching what's going on in the rest of the country, I think that's unfortunately a very real possibility. And with all these students being either confined to their dorms or dumped out into the community. I worry about that, not only for me and citizens, but also for the students themselves. That was just my question. So I'm hoping that somewhere along the lines, that is also being discussed with the college.
Sutherland, thank you. As city manager mentioned, on Thursday, we'll have a meeting with Sam Jones of the college to kind of talk about the college's plans on how to handle some of these situations. So,
Yes,
thank you.
and then just in closing, I've been watching on campus, and I know they're not in session technically, but today coming down here, there were at least half a dozen people wandering around campus with no masks, notwithstanding the signs that say masks required. I worry about the ability to implement that, but thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and move on to background presentations and discussions. And first, item A is update and presentation concerning the fire station. Kick that off.
Thank you, Mayor. So today what we wanted to do is update you on where we are with the fire station project. As you know, it's been a long journey since 2016 when we began considering this issue. And there's been a lot of machinations. And in the last year, since council voted, we had the turnover of the fire chief position and the process of getting him up to speed, finalizing programming for the 2 stations, and we are now ready to issue the RFP. Before we did that, we thought it'd be prudent to come back to you, since it has been a considerable amount of time since you voted, to refresh you on the issues, as well as give you updated financials for both the cost of construction as well as staffing. So what we wanted to do is start with the discussion concerning construction, and we'll let Guernsey Tingle, Andy Cronin is going to lead us off in that discussion.
Welcome, Mr. Cronin. And what I would like to do, after the architect talks about the facilities, I'll give an opportunity for council to ask some questions of you, if that'd be okay, and then we'll go on to staffing. Kind of handle that in 2 segments.
From Stuart Cooper Newell. Our team was the one that did the study in 2017 and also the most recent update to the programming. Wanted to just refresh a little bit, and then we'll move through and to come to the results of the current effort we've put into programming. As you know, the station's 43 years old, with the exception of the EOC and fire admin area, which is actually 11 years old. And to keep in your mind, it's currently 18,000 square feet, just under 18,000 square feet of space in the existing station. Just briefly to cover, kind of give a perspective on some of the issues that, both from a kind of program size standpoint and also facility conditions standpoint, just want to cover a couple of things. As you probably well know, the station being that old, there's some issues. And one of those is the bay size door is too small. Apparatus doesn't seem to get any smaller year after year. So the existing doors are 12 by 12s. Current station design standards are 14 by 14. So you can see it's challenging to get apparatus in and out of the bays. Bay sizes are too small. There's such a shortage of space that equipment flows into the bays, spills into the bays, and equipment from the bays spills into spaces surrounding it. So it's really, they've done a great job of making do of what they've had. You can see in the picture here some of the PPE equipment that's right up against one of the vehicles. And I want to ask Ken if you would speak to some of these as well.
Thank you, Andy. Again, my name is Ken Newell. Thank you for having us. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Our firm specializes in station design. I've worked on well over 300 myself personally, and so we've been involved in well over 400 station designs. So much of what you find in the existing facilities that could be considered problematic is not just functional issues. There's a number of functional issues there, obviously, and Andy has addressed some of those, and we'll be addressing more. Some of them have to do with safety issues as well, which is what the slide in front of you discusses. Those of you that are familiar with the fire industry or have been in the fire industry realize that really for the last decade or so, coming to light in the fire services is the high use of carcinogens or high occurrence of carcinogens in firefighters. Firefighters on 8 different types of cancers are anywhere from 22 to 121% more likely to develop and succumb to 8 different types of cancers as well. So part of that is because of the carcinogens they bring back to the facilities. In your existing facilities, that is a facility that's laid out with bays in the middle where most of the carcinogens are generated or returned to the station, and then living spaces on each side of those. So the first bullet talks about the crossing of the hot zone. That hot zone is where you would expect to find most of these contaminants or carcinogens. And because firefighters and personnel are constantly walking between those, through that space to get to other spaces, it becomes very problematic. The issue of carcinogens takes place in all of the parts of the station, not just the bays, but this is one of the critical parts. Andy mentioned, Mr. Cronin mentioned the PPE storage areas in the bays. That's not only a carcinogen issue and a hot zone issue, but it's the life of the the PPEs themselves, and the off-gassing, the dangerous off-gassing that occurs from those PPEs while they are stored in the bays. Flammable materials is a problem in the bays as well. Slip issues, because there are no drains for this floor. Any leakage, and almost any truck from time to time will leak or comes back from a call wet. Any leakage simply runs across the floor in different directions, creating a larger slip hazard. Again, another safety issue. And then there's a lot of noise to deal with. We typically would try to house a lot of these noisy compressor components in separated or isolated parts of the building so that we can control the noise, or even so that the personnel using them can use ear protection when they go into these very specific areas. So we got a lot of noise issues in those bays. And then the inadequate air and infiltration. So you're required by code to remove a certain amount of the carcinogens and even just the exhaust contaminants from the bays. And so you've got a real challenge in your existing conditions of how to remove those projects as well. Part of also the concern in the bays is having to do, as we mentioned a moment ago, with decontamination. So right now there's general laundry cleaning taking place in the bays themselves. So you're mixing clean and contaminated parts of articles of clothing and materials into one area. And then the inadequate way to decontaminate things when it comes back from the fire calls or the fire grounds is part of what we see. There's been a whole science and an evolution that occurs daily or monthly on how to control these, when you bring contaminants back, how to deal with those. All of those are aspects that the current station are missing as you look at some of those facilities.
And do you want to just speak to the
Yes, I'll be glad to. Thank you. So some of the same accommodation problems are not only in the bays, but go into the living parts of the station. This is where the firefighter expects to be able to be comfortable and to operate and do the things they need to between calls. So some of those things that we're seeing there is the inadequate space to accommodate the staffing that you've got. So it's extremely overcrowded and overused in the facilities that you currently have. Gender separation has become a big deal, not just over the last 10 years, but over the last 20 or 30 years. There's more and more female firefighters in the industry currently, and because of that, being able to separate and having some sort of a gender separation there, the problem the existing station has is there is a dedicated male and dedicated female facilities, but that is based on a specific number of firefighters in that gender. And so the only thing you can guarantee if it's 90-10 or 80-20 is that you'll be wrong because that ratio changes on a regular basis. So the ability to be able to change or accommodate that ever-changing ratio through some of the more modern approaches to station design is critical. Not only that, but in the sleep rooms, dedicating some space, as you can see from the photo here, open sleep rooms or bunk rooms has problems with noise. It might be a medic call. It could be an engine call. So you don't want in the middle of the night, if you can get away with it, waking everybody up. Sleep deprivation is one of the huge health issues encountered by firefighters in today's industry. And if they're always receiving calls all night, even if it's not their call, getting woke up from it and not being able to get back to sleep, that's a huge problem as well. We mentioned cross-contamination. That comes into these parts of the buildings as well. The inadequate facilities that keeps us from being able to bring carcinogens, separate air systems, separate airlocks, the ability to control those contaminants from coming in, and again, some of those noise issues. You see in the second bullet, the major bullet, the inadequate locker and study and training space. You can see an example here of what they've got for the continuing education is a requirement for today's firefighters, and to be able to use those and adequately have space for that. No staff laundry area available. They're taking their clean clothes and washing them in the same areas that contaminated or carcinogen-laden clothes and equipment is being used. And then I believe, Andy, you were going to talk about some of the conditions of these.
Ken's actually written some articles. He's a national expert, and if these are available, we'd be glad to forward these to you. One, minimizing cancer risk through station design, and also one on pandemic impacts of station signs, so glad to make those available going forward. So we won't belabor this, but other factors that are, as you can see, worn out, the kitchen facilities, storage, things circulate from one area of the station or the other through the day room, which is adjacent to the kitchen. The building, frankly, is just worn out after its 43-year life. They're constantly addressing roof leaks, which is just kind of a constant maintenance item. And I will say that I just commend the station. The station Chief Eagles staff has just done a fabulous job of making stations safe as best they can with the constraints that they're working with. So, the other things programmatically in terms of space, right now there's an example at one of the, I think last year or maybe the year before, they had to move a fire inspector out of his office because they needed more space for sleeping. So overflow sleeping space, and he's now bunked in with, not bunked in, but working in another office. And frankly, he should be in the fire admin section, which there's a shortage of space in the fire admin as well. So, and then currently the training area and the exercise areas are on the other side of the bay, so those are ones that require crossing the apparatus space to get to. So just some of those other things. The building being 43 years old, as you can imagine, is not exactly energy efficient. So again, there's an insulation in the walls and 2 inches in the roof. So that's something that will radically improve as the new station gets built. There's no sprinkler system, no backflow preventer on the water service, no grease trap, no oil water separator. So these are all just things that will get fixed for the new station. The current station is 1 story, so it's pretty much filling the site, and yet it's being 18,000 square feet. It's not quite half, just a little bit more than half the size of what the projected need is. So obviously there's a challenge to accommodate those spaces on the site. It will require going to a 2nd story. So in 2017, we were asked to do this study, which resulted in this facilities evaluation, and also we developed, as a result of that, the program, the initial program for this fire station. We identified the functional issues and the program shortcomings, and developed this program, and then a test fit of the station design, which to verify that it could in fact actually be placed on this site. So, and in addition to that, there was the anticipation at the time that there would be a cost of potentially up to $1 million for temporary facilities during the course of construction, as has happened in other places. So since the time of that study in 2017, we've looked into a number of other things at the request of the city manager and council. One, initially, pretty soon after the study, we looked into the possibility of other station sites for a new central station, again with that central station, which is what we had been asked to design or program a single station when we did the study. And we looked and see if there's any other sites that we could find that could accommodate a new central station, which would mean we wouldn't have to do temporary facilities and would make the transition much more smooth. But in looking at those, neither one of the potential sites kind of panned out to be a site that seemed to be appropriate for that. We were then and subsequently asked to look at the possibility, if we opened the kind of option of doing a 2-station solution, what sites might be available that would work for that. So we looked at a couple of sites for that, and that's what led to what came to you last year. At the same time, once we developed a kind of a test fit, Ken's firm developed a kind of a test fit for those second station site, we also looked at what money was left in the budget, kind of the available funds that we could put back into the existing station in order to solve some of those problems of the building conditions. Needed a new roof, lots of modernizations that were needed there. So that's what resulted in that initial budget that accompanied the second station. We also at the same time looked at the possibility of, would it be possible to rebuild that initial Station 1 on the same site and maintain operation of the fire station during that period of time? And definitely not an optimal way to do it. It would be possible, though, we determined, and we developed a budget for that and a kind of a test fit for that as well. Making some modifications to the existing bays, finding a way that they could be modified on one side, still operate out of the other side, and then flip that. So and then sequentially take down the fire and EOC, move them to the third floor of the municipal building, build a new two-story addition, move the people from the front into the back, then rebuild the front. Just kind of a complicated process, which actually is an expensive one as well and time-consuming. But it was possible. And that resulted in a budget that was also put forward at that time, which I think is in your notes as well. So lots of things were looked at, and the intent was just to try and find the best solution for, it's always, we love it when clients come to us with unlimited budgets and, just do whatever, it's just 99% of the time that doesn't happen. There are always constraints and trade-offs. And so what we were trying to do is just to help you evaluate those and put the information in front of you so that you could make a decision. And that's really what we've done this year. In January, I think of this year, we were asked to assist in programming the second station so that there would be the tools available to do a solicitation for this construction of these stations. So we developed a program for the second station and also took another look at the program for the first station just to see if there are any things that we could do there that might result in some space savings that would help us economize. And we sized the first and the second station both based on the apparatus that would be needed in each station to provide the services that were needed, and the resulting personnel, which drives the size of sleep spaces and living spaces and things like that. So that's what resulted in what we're, I'm sorry, I got behind on my slides here. So that's resulted in this program here. And I have to, again, commend the Chief Eagle and his staff. They were great partners in working to see what could be done to optimize that and to make it as efficient as possible. And so that resulted in these program numbers, and this is for two stations. The Station 1, just in summary kind of sizes here, would result in 28,326 square feet program. Now, just to remember, in 2017, the program for Station 1 was going to be 34,000 and some odd, so it's significantly less as a result of being able to put function into the second station, which you see here. Second station in 2018, when we looked at it last, was programmed at, it was anticipated to be 14,000 square feet. And we were able, looking at it carefully in concert with the first station, to get it down to 11.7. So that, in lots of numbers here, apologize, that results in a 40,000 total square footage to compare with the 34,459 of the one station solution from the study in 2017, and the current square footage of roughly 18,000 square feet. And then one other aspect of this is those are construction kind of square footages needed for construction. But in addition to the construction costs, there are also these other costs. There are design costs, costs for generators, contingencies, temporary facilities, new EOC equipment, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, such those kinds of things. And that results in, for a two-station solution, in a number of between 3.7 and roughly $3 million for those what we might call soft costs or non-construction costs. So if we add these costs then to projected costs for the two stations with their square footages, you'll see the total construction cost number, which is the construction cost of the station in the low range and high range. And those are based on different, kind of a range of square foot costs. And then the total project cost projection for two stations, which ranges from 16.7 to 20.3 million. So it's a big number, And Ken, I just wanted to let Ken chat a little bit about his exposure, his experience.
I mentioned earlier the number of stations that we worked in. What that results is in us being involved in the bidding of stations about every 30 days, 30 to 60 days. Just received bids on the last station roughly a month ago and have another one coming up this month. And so this range of prices, the low range to the high range, is within what we're seeing in the industry right now. I would love to be able to tell you I can guarantee that it will fall within that range, but what we're finding right now is due to the economy and the conditions that we're in, there's a lot of volatility in the market, the bidding market right now. In one area, you can take bids this month and it come in completely different than 2 or 3 months from now. So and it's not all up, it's some down as well. So this is a range that I am also providing for other fire departments currently as well, and one that we feel as comfortable as you can be comfortable with. Again, we don't have a crystal ball that tells us that, but we are receiving regular bids on fire station design of this scope and categorization. So feel pretty good about these numbers. The other cost category varies greatly depending on department, depending on the level of IT and furnishings that they may have or be reusing. So there's a lot of variety in that number, but we feel good about this range that you're seeing here.
Chief Eagle and his staff have actually helped develop some of these soft cost numbers, so they're pretty real numbers for things like IT and AV and new EOC equipment and things like that. So just these, frankly, kind of thought, wow, when we saw these numbers, we thought, well, that's a lot of money. So we thought, well, let's look again at the one station just to give the council and the city the information they need to kind of understand the pluses and minuses of things. So that's what we did here. In looking at a single station version to address the program needs and all of the needs that we've talked about, that would result in about 31,300 square feet, which is a little bit more than 3,000 square feet less than the program that we worked on in 2017. So again, those savings were from things like combining training space with EOC space and things like that were just ways that Chief Eagle and his staff felt like those are things that we can work with, live with, and instead of having separate spaces, and some things like that allowed us to make project some savings. That would result in a project cost projection there of between 13 and 18.85 million. So the savings versus a two-station, just to give you that information, is between 3.66 and 4.45 million over, as opposed to a two-station solution. So that I think is pretty much the story there. I have one other thing I was going to share, and then glad to address questions. And the last thing was the concept for the temporary facilities plan. This is just an aerial view. The concept here is and the city has been working together to develop this as a way to keep that expense down from building a temporary station of some sort, and also to maximize the response or minimize the response times, because they'd be essentially at the same place as they are now. So the concept in the light green up at the top there is to put the apparatus into the bays of the Public Works garage, and then there's a day room essentially to the top of the screen there that would provide the day spaces that are needed to support fire station operations, so that during the daytime and into the early evening hours, they would operate completely out of that station right next to their apparatus. And then the only caveat with the apparatus is that I believe the plan for the tower is to drain that, and then that would stay adjacent in the Public Works yard there, which I think it has before during last couple of years ago when there was difficulty with the fire. So that would be the plan for the apparatus and day operations. And then down in the municipal building, the blue square that you see, the light blue square, would be where the fire administration staff would be housed in the city manager's office area. And then the red item there is the stairwell that goes straight down to the ground there. And the kind of brownish area to the lower left would be the sleeping area. So the sleeping area would be on the third floor of the municipal building at that end. And then in the evening hours, the yellow dot, or the kind of orangey yellow dot, would be a medic would be parked in that location so that staff could exit down the hall, down the stair, and be right in their medic unit and off to a call. That is kind of the plan. And then for fire, the green arrow that you see there, they'd be able to exit that stairway and traverse that spot and get to the apparatus there in the green. The beige square is bathrooms and showers that are in that location. And then the purple square to the right would be a potential EOC space if we relocated the generator from the current fire station over to the municipal building side. Then that would allow that, at least on a temporary basis, to function as an EOC, either there or potentially also as an option in the Stryker building, which is supported with the generator as well. So it seems like a reasonable solution, and I think, again, just a credit to the city for their creativity. It's never an ideal when you're operating out of temporary facilities, but we felt like this was a reasonable solution and one that is a tremendous cost savings to the city. So pass it to you or ask questions.
So thank you. We'll turn to council for some questions regarding the presentation we just heard.
So thank you, Mr. Cronin and Mr. Newell, for your expertise on the presentations. Don't want to rehash the slides at the beginning, but each one of the slides that were listed as shortcomings in the building systems, just for the public who may be here or viewing, in the 2019, the renovation that was approved, many of those issues were going to be eliminated as well, because with the second station, we were freeing up space in the current station to address many of those issues that were listed as the shortcomings.
Yes, in that kind of one that you mentioned was part of the agreement in 2019. The main issues that were covered there in that kind of 5.5 or whatever it was $1 million budget were building conditions issues. What it did not address, and because there wasn't enough money to address, was the additional programmatic space that was required. So it's around 10,000 square feet short of what's actually needed in terms of program space to accommodate sleep areas and a variety of other things. So, and then the improvements and upsizing of additional existing spaces that were needed.
It also could, and this, I'm not trying to be elementary, but could you, for the folks in the audience and watching, what inadequate front apron space means so that people understand?
And I'd answer it too, but
Tag team it, how's that? So normally what you would expect, and you can see a little bit of the image of the fire station below here in the lower right-hand corner of this image, we would normally want to see an apron space that is at least as long as the longest piece of apparatus and clearances at the front and the back of each one of them, so that you can stage, train, wash down, whatever you may need to do in those areas. You can see there is a little more space of aprons in the backdrop, or the back apron area, but that space is also used for a lot of other activities more than just the staging and preparation of those trucks themselves. So we would like to see a minimum of clearance of 50 feet. That's assuming that you get a long tower at some point in time that could potentially take that much space at those front aprons. And so not only the depth of those aprons is problematic, but as we described about the building itself, the width of the doors, the overhead doors, are smaller than what the standard is today and what normal equipment would typically fit in. So if you have smaller door widths and smaller door openings, then what you find is the fire department finds themselves in a position when it's time to purchase new equipment, they have to spec a special size, a smaller than normal size on the equipment to fit the width in the area. So it's not just about the clearances of the aprons on the outside front, it's about the width of those aprons as well. So I hope that answers your questions.
Yes. So in looking at the program requirements for the two facilities, without getting way down in the details, the difference in the square footage, is that basically the 6 bays versus the 4 bays?
between the one Station 1 solution when there's
Correct.
just Station 1, when there's 1 and 2, yes. The big difference is the 4-bay difference And because of the equipment that goes to the second station, and also the personnel, there's a little bit of difference there in personnel and associated space related to them. Those are the main.
With the EOC, if, and this is obviously whatever this council decides to approve going forward, if the second station was approved and we built a second station, is there, from your experience, would there be an opportunity to gain additional space for the EOC without having to tear down a building that's only 11 years old?
The challenge is that the program need for the new, for the full program of the facility that's needed even on the station, one site, if you build a second station, is still about 10,000 square feet more than there is now. So there's no room on a one-story site to be able to add that square footage in the current without eliminating parking or something like that. So you have to go 2 stories, and to go 2 stories, you really, the only place to do it is where the current building is. So that would require tearing it down, which either displaces people, or if you're trying to do it in a renovated way like we talked about. So adding that additional 10,000 square feet really makes it almost necessary to move that EOC. Right now, the EOC, I think, is right almost up against the back property line. So the only place to grow it is into the bay apron on the back or out into the parking lot, the way it's currently configured. So it's really, it's a tight site. It's a tough one.
And just for comparison, and I believe you may have been involved in James City Station 1 in Toano. Just comparison, I believe that station's about just under 22,000 square feet.
I think it's a 23 or 24,000.
So 31,000 square feet in a single building.
The big difference here in this one is fire admin is here, and the EOC. That's the big difference between this and that station. They do have, I think I forget if it's 5 or 6 bays, but it's otherwise fairly similar. They do have a good office area. It's the fire admin and ESC component.
Okay, that's all I have for now.
Mr. Maslin?
Let's see, can I go all the way back?
So I had the privilege of actually working in this fire station the first day. And we had actually moved from a fire station in Merchant Square, and this was actually a huge improvement. And we actually had 2 fire stations at that point, and we protected 100 square miles. We had, our staff was 70, which was both career and volunteers, and the career firefighters were also part of the volunteer unit. If the public is confused by this presentation, I think it's understandable. Hopefully the following observations will give context to our questions. We had requested that the presentation include background information leading up to City Council's unanimous approved motion on March 14th, 2019, which directed staff to construct a second fire station at 912 Capitol Landing Road and renovate the current fire station. The proposed budget, the budget proposed by staff was $5.24 million for improvements at the current fire station and $5.9 million for the second fire station. This proposed total project budget presented by staff totaled $11.2 million and included budget for professional services, soft costs, and contingency. It just unfortunately was in a different format than the format in this presentation. The March 14th, 2019 decision was a culmination of staff presentations over the previous 2 years. During 2017, the previous city manager had his consultants present a proposal to tear down the current fire station and build a new one there. That presentation did not result in any approval to move forward by the city council, but was totally transparent when compared to this presentation, which actually seeks the same course of action. However, the city did sell $13 million worth of bonds back then to fund public safety capital projects. We have been paying interest on those bonds for the past 2 years. Starting this year, debt service cost is about $925,000 per year. If there had been transparency and background information for this presentation, the public would have been reminded that staff presented 2 alternate projects for City Council decision 17 months ago. A single station project which provided $11.5 million worth of renovations to the existing fire station versus the alternate proposal, which was agreed to by City Council, was to build a second fire station at Capitol Landing Road and provide $5.24 million worth of improvements to the current fire station. In addition to providing improved facilities for our firefighters and paramedics, this alternate project would provide significant community benefits, including improved response time throughout the entire city and an economic development boost to the Capitol Landing area. Comments from staff and City Council advocating for the 2-station solution included the following as recorded in the meeting minutes. Staff had explained that public investment drives private investment, and that building Fire Station 2 on Capitol Landing Road would be particularly helpful in an area that needs redevelopment. Staff also indicated that the construction timeline for Fire Station 2 would allow for a gradual increase to staff, and that the improved response times were a determining factor in recommending the 2-station project. Let me repeat that. The improved response times were a determining factor in recommending the 2-station project. City Council had explained that their decision was based on the data. It is time to build a second station, and they were confident that Capitol Landing Road was the right place. As we review this presentation, please ask yourself what has changed since City Council directed staff to build the second fire station and make improvements to the current fire station. Ask yourself, why should the community support a new project which will not only cost more than the $11.2 million project approved 17 months ago, but will eliminate the community and the economic development benefits of the project already approved? Be reminded that the $11.2 million project is already funded with bonds which must be used for public safety projects. One of the things that's not mentioned in this presentation is response time. And I'd like to maybe have the chief explain why response time is critical in terms of an EMS setting and then a fire setting in terms of what's the rules of thumb in terms of minutes delay, in terms of a fire, in terms of how it spreads in a building.
Okay, so response times are absolutely an important part of any type of public safety. The best practice is NFPA 1710, which is the deployment model for career departments. It's what every department should strive for, and it talks about staffing and response times. Basically, they say, NFPA suggests that you should have your initial first response on scene within 4 minutes, 90% of the time. There are areas in our city right now, Long Hill Woods, Piney Creek, parts of Skipwith, as well as Capitol Landing, as well as Quarter Path, where we're not able to meet that 90% of the time. NFPA 1710 also says that you should have an ALS transport ambulance on the scene within 8 minutes, 90% of the time. We do that pretty much everywhere in the city. If we have people ready to go, we meet that pretty close to 90% of the time. They also recommend that you have an emergency response, a full effective response force on the scene within 8 minutes, 90% of the time. And we do that with the aid of our automatic aid partners in York County and James City County. So there are parts of the city where we are unable to meet the 4-minute response guideline that NFPA provides, But as far as the 8-minute response for ALS ambulance as well as a effective response force, we are generally able to do that pretty close to 90% of the time. Up until now, we have been measuring response times on averages. We are just now, since my arrival, starting to look at percentile, 90 percentile, so I do not have those numbers for you right now, but we believe that the 4-minute response in the middle of the city, we're pretty good at getting that 90% of the time, and the 8 minutes with our mutual aid partners, we can do 90% of the time as well.
So on the EMS side, when teaching CPR instructor trainers, we talked about the 4-minute rule, that if you've got a cardiac arrest, you want to start CPR. Nowadays, it's get the AED there within 4 minutes. And one of the challenges, I think, that the response times that you're reporting, that we have an objective of less than 5 minutes per the budget book, and we have not been able to actually get that on an average basis. That is really the time from you get the call to you get to the scene, correct? In terms of what you're measuring?
So yes, the NFPA 1710 also talks about the processing time for the PSAP and the time it takes for the dispatch center to determine what's going on from the caller and get that out to the correct responder. And then there's a time limit that they recommend for turnout time, which is the time it takes once we receive the call to the time we're in the truck rolling. And then there's the travel time, which is what I just went over.
And then you've got the time from arrival, which you mark arrived, to actually hands on the patient. Correct?
That's not in NFPA. NFPA says you should have the first initial responder, BLS responder there on an EMS within 4 minutes, 90% of the time. And we're able to get over 70% of the city in that time, but there are pockets that I mentioned throughout all sides of the city that we're not able to do that. So in order to do that, we would not only build the second station, but we would build a third station on the other side of town to be able to get that 4-minute response time 90% in all areas of the city. But that's not the topic of discussion for today. So you're absolutely right, 4 minutes. Wherever you build a station, provided you have staffing to support that, you will improve your response time, provided you're not taking those staffing away from your other stations to cover that station.
Okay, thank you. Could you go to the next slide, Andy? So if we look at the front of our current fire station, we've got 6 bays there, correct? If we were to build Fire Station 2 right away, that would free up 3 of those bays. That would free up half of that apparatus floor. We know it's crowded, and we could use the empty bays then to actually spread equipment out. We could also use the empty bays to help with the renovations that were authorized, the $5.24 million renovation. So we could see that building Fire Station 2 as an enabling project for that. Is that correct?
Is that to me?
Was that a
Either one.
question?
Yeah. So wouldn't that help us to have 3 empty bays in Fire Station 1 right now?
Sure, absolutely.
So, and I think that was one of the things that we did not actually address 17 months ago. The thought was you do both projects at the same time. But by starting with Fire Station 2 right now, there are a lot of benefits in terms of what you get in Fire Station 1, which would help with the phased facility improvements that would be part of that budget. What about, so the next slide, please. So I think we all agree that these deficiencies need to be handled, and I think that that was part of the facility improvements that City Council unanimously approved.
Yes,
17 months ago.
The building issues were.
Yeah. What about the next slide? Do we take care of those?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, yes, it can be, yeah.
The following slide?
I say that there is no increase in square footage. So you're basically renovating existing spaces. So where you have problems, like you have your space on the west side of the bays, you've still got space on the west side of the bays. Where you have bunk room limitations and things like that, you're still going to have bunk room limitations just because you've got square foot limitations. You're 10,000 square feet under.
Well, yeah, one of the things in projects management we're concerned about is scope creep. We're concerned about identifying musts versus wants. What's really necessary in this project?
Yeah, that's what we did, I think I mentioned
so
before, with the 3,000 square foot reduction that was moving from some wants to some musts.
So, for example, the EOC, how many seats do we have in the EOC currently? 24. We've got 24 seats in the current EOC. Last week, we stood up the EOC for the storm and tornadoes. We heard from the governor that there were like 40 tornado warnings in the Commonwealth, which was maybe the most we've ever had. How many of those 24 seats were occupied for that stand-up?
I think we only had 6 or 7 for this most current storm.
And I think that what we also learned was because of COVID, we can virtually contribute to the EOC, and we don't all have to be there at the same time.
There is an opportunity for that, yes, sir.
And I think that some of the personnel that normally would have been there were actually represented virtually, correct? But going back to Andy's point about, so if we look at the $5.24 million that was approved 17 months ago to make facility improvements to Fire Station 1, the program included roof replacement, fire admin IT upgrade, apparatus bay structural changes at doors, new apparatus bay doors, reroute sanitary lines for building plumbing, general demolition, including the host tower, since we don't use that anymore, renovation of personnel areas, and the personnel areas were sleeping and the dining area, minor additions. So according to this matrix that you provided, 2,075 square feet of additions, and then renovation of the west area, 2,160 square feet. So I guess what I'm trying to point out is we were doing a lot with $5.24 million. And it seems to me it's going to satisfy a lot of these deficiencies that we have now. We talked about the EOC. Yeah, let me go to, so let's go to the temporary. Well, temporary facility costs, that's on our page 18 of 38. You have that one. Williamsburg Fire Station non-construction costs for 2 stations. There you go. So while we show a range for a lot of these components, we're pretty specific for temporary facility costs, which is amazing because I think that's the one area that is still fluid in terms of what we're saying could happen. We've got a diagram that says the EOC would be in the municipal building, but yet current thinking is maybe it should be in the Stryker Center. I don't think a lot of the details have been worked out to get that specific 150. So talking about if the firefighters, paramedics are going to be having sleeping quarters on the 3rd floor of the municipal building, isn't that a different occupancy? From a code standpoint, what do you have to do to separate that occupancy from an office function?
It is sprinkled already, so the sprinkler's there. And there's been some discussion with the code official about temporary use of that space for this use. And it seems to be an appropriate, something that he's willing to accommodate. To be honest with you, I don't remember off the top of my head what the rating of the floor is. That's normally the issue, what the rating of separation of the floor from the spaces below, because it is for sleeping. So it's an accommodation that there's been an indication of willingness to do that. Just as with the EOC potentially being there would be an accommodation because it's not a building that's designed as an essential facility. So it's a 12-month solution.
Or up to 18 months. But what type of walls are you going to put up walls in there for?
They're just it would just be the thought is that the walls would just be partitions so that the air conditioning can be left as it currently is. So it's really just a temporary stud walls.
And the density for the fire sprinklers that are really pointing up are adequate?
Sprinklers would still prevent coverage because the walls would be short enough to.
And I took it when we went through there today that was not a 1 hour rated wall because I didn't see a labeled fire door dividing that space. Is that?
And those are the kinds of things that are covered by the
150. And talk about, the most important place in a fire station is the kitchen. So tell us what the kitchen's going to be like we saw the day room at Public Works. And there's a lot of things that happen in the kitchen that you saw we needed to replace. Right now, the only thing that, other than space and a huge ice machine, isn't that going to be a lot of work to get that to work as a commercial kitchen?
Yeah, it's a temporary, I think the concept is it's a temporary accommodation. So there is plumbing in the other side of that wall in the apparatus space. So there's drainage available there, there's water, there's actually gas available there. So the thought was that you could use not a complete commercial hood, but one like we used at Twin Fire Station where you have kind of like a residential suppression hood. So we think that's a possibility. It's not going to be a full-fledged commercial kitchen, for sure.
So what about and we also went over the apparatus. Right now, they've got 4 bays there. 2 are drive-through, 2 are not. It looks like it can accommodate our first due equipment, which would be about, did we say 4 pieces of apparatus inside?
Currently, yes, we have 4 first line, first out apparatus.
And so everything else is going to be out in the elements? Is that the plan?
No, there's multiple shed-type storage, both on-site there at Public Works, as well as out at Waller Mill Water Treatment Plant that could house equipment and already houses some of our equipment.
And one of the questions the public may ask was, we have an operating Public Works department there, the shops, where do they do that work? And the thought being they would go to another jurisdiction and co-locate with them, is that the thought?
We're looking at several different options. One is to relocate to Waller Mill, to the existing bays that are out there, and do whatever modifications may be needed to make it ready to go. And then one is to share the space and work together. That works in the military. It's used on a lot of bases where they do repairs right in the bay, and if they need to pull out a truck, they pull it out and pull whatever in, and it's done all over on American bases. And then the third option would be to locate, or probably the best option would be to co-locate with one of our neighbors, and we've already had some discussion with them, but we're working all those details out to see which one of those options works best for everybody.
And one of the concerns was response time at night. If the firefighter and paramedics have to come down from the 3rd floor, walk half a block to get to, say, the engine, could you update everybody on the time trials we had there?
Sure. So as you and I walked it today at a fairly leisurely pace, from the bedroom, proposed bedroom facility to the bottom of the steps where we would propose to park a medic unit. Took 53 seconds, which is well within the range of what we're doing right now in the fire station. To walk over to the first two bays, it was right at a little over a minute, less than a minute and a half. And then going to the furthest bay was a minute 53 seconds, which is 53 seconds over what our goal is. It's 43 seconds over what NFPA recommends. And that would be just during the sleeping hours, as the thought would be we'd actually have some improved turnout being that close to the day room and everything from the time they start their day till they go to bed. They would be in that facility or out on the training ground or doing something like that.
But, going back to the slide there, so one of the questions that we wanted clarification on was the $275,000 for the generator. What does that represent?
Represents two generators, one for the Station 1 and one for Station 2. So I guess I didn't put it up here, but I think it's 100 for the small station and 175 for the.
But now, since Station 1 already has a generator, your point is that if we build a new station with those additional requirements, that we would need another one. There's something in the draft RFP about moving the existing generator from Station 1 to the municipal building. Was that tied into if we need the EOC there, or was that just a nice to have a new generator?
It was two things. One is it was because if we did what we had shown in these documents, there would be too small a generator to support that Station 1, so we'd need a new generator there. And that would give the opportunity to provide the generator to support the municipal building, which would give officers and the folks in the municipal building the support for emergency power, and also would allow use for, at least on a temporary basis, for an EOC facility.
Okay. Just to wrap up my comments, so 17 months ago, City Council unanimously approved the city manager's $11.2 million recommendation to build a second fire station on Capitol Landing Road and provide significant facility improvements to the existing fire station. This action was based on 3+ years of study by staff using several consultants, and rejected the proposal by the previous city manager to stay with the one fire station, tear it down, and build a new one in the current location. The $11.2 million project is fully funded by public safety bonds. Debt service is $925,000 annually, whether we move forward or not. No tax increase is needed for this project. City Council's direction to staff 17 months ago provides an optimal solution and generates 4 significant benefits. 1, the community benefits from having improved response times. 2, businesses benefit from the public investment in the Capitol Landing area as an enabling project to jumpstart economic development there. 3, firefighters and paramedics benefit from facilities which more appropriately support their operations and 24/7 occupancy requirements. And after completing Fire Station 2 as an enabling project, Fire Station 1 will have instant space relief since half of the apparatus bays will be vacated. This will allow the existing apparatus and equipment to spread out and create room to phase in the $5.24 million worth of facility improvements without complete disruption to the fire department operations and deterioration of community response times. Based on the schedule proposed by staff in their presentation 17 months ago, Fire Station 2 should have been under construction by now. As we know, because of the pandemic, many contractors are currently hungry for construction projects. We need to take advantage of this. Since City Council has already approved the $11.2 million project, no further action is required other than to ask staff what else they need so they can follow through with our previous direction. Thank you.
Ms. Ramsey?
Thank you for the presentation, and I also have a few questions and comments, and I had mine sort of mixed together, staff and building, so I'll try and keep them separated. First of all, to me, it's a given that the building needs to be rebuilt. I agree with you that it's outlived its lifespan, and I saw that there were a number of comments that it was actually less expensive overall to build one new state-of-the-art facility as opposed to try to renovate and sort of jerry-rig into the space. And I hadn't taken into account about the EOC and the extra need for 10,000 square feet, so I appreciate you explaining that. One thing that Chief Eagle was, and you alluded to, was the sort of multifunctional aspect of the EOC. And when we talk today, I guess that would be for the EOC for training and also provide much more space for the volunteers than what is available now. As I think, Chief, what were you saying about the volunteer space that they currently have?
Yes, currently they don't, it's often standing room only in the room that they use for meeting. So this room would accommodate everyone to be there and be comfortable when they meet and to not have to go off-site so that they're there with the equipment, with everything they need to be able to be more inclusive in the fire department and better serve the community.
And if I remember correctly, the current volunteer room is sort of next to the bay. Is that correct?
Correct. It's opposite of the current admin space and off of the bay. It's a training room, and then it's also what we use for the volunteers.
So really for the volunteers to be there and then get over to the admin space, they're crossing one of those hot zones?
They are, yes.
Okay. And there was one other thing. So that would give a little bit more flexibility to that. And let me get through here. Some of my notes, sorry. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So regardless of whether we have the one new station or a new station and a second station, the volunteers, I think you said, would remain at Fire Station 1.
That's our general belief. Now, I haven't had that discussion with the board of directors. I'm beginning to think maybe they want to be at Station 2 based on the comments that I'm hearing, but every conversation I've had has been that they would be primarily at Station 1 because of the proximity to William and Mary, and that being that such a large part of our volunteer force is the volunteers.
From William and Mary.
From William and Mary, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And one thing that Mr. Maslin was talking about was the temporary facilities, and I went over there with you all and did that too. And we were talking about the medic calls would be the same response time from the temporary facility as currently now. And this, the only time we're talking about a difference in response time is at night for a fire and taking an engine out of the storage shed or wherever. So what percentage of the calls are typically medic calls compared to fire calls?
It's 80% or right around 80% or better.
So even with the temporary facility, we would still be well within our response time for 80% of the calls?
Yes.
At night. During the day, we'd be at the same rate.
Correct.
Okay. And Mr. Maslin was talking about what had changed between 17 months ago and now. And one thing that I wanted to ask about was call volume and response time. And am I correct in that response time is a combination of population, distance, and sort of the number of calls you have in those areas?
I think, yes.
So when this was done 17 months ago, and we were looking at address points, it seemed that there was more of a prevalence to Capitol Landing Road because of the GIS system that was used and the address points. But I think since then, we found out that that data was inaccurate or insufficient or didn't accurately take care of, like William and Mary, for instance. Is that correct, Drew, Chief Eagle?
I would say that my analysis found it to be incomplete because we were unable to measure complete address points in certain areas of the city. So, for example, a dormitory which may house 200 students counted as one address, whereas an apartment complex with 100 apartments would count as 100 address points. So hotels, dormitories, certain areas of the city, the GIS data that was available would not allow us to dig down into that. So we are just now trying to figure out how we can better capture that material or that data set to be able to give you a more accurate determination.
Because since William and Mary houses 75% of their population on campus, I'm guessing that's close to 5,000 students that are here for a good percentage of the year, notwithstanding this year. I think that would be information that we would want to take into account as far as response time and population centers. And for me, too, I think another thing that has changed over the past 17 months is the actual construction that we've seen in central Williamsburg. I mean, 17 months ago, Midtown Row was sort of theoretical, but now we can actually see that there are going to be a significant number of people there. And even though we can't take those into account as address points, I would think we would be thinking about them and the needs that we're going to have in that area of town.
Yes, ma'am. I wasn't here for the original study, and I don't know to what extent Midtown Row or High Street was looked at, but that certainly is an area that that's growing that we need to consider.
And Drew, do we have any proposals for growth or new residential or commercial at this point on Capitol Landing Road that we should take into consideration as new scheduled for that area?
We don't have any residential plan, no. We are looking at Capitol Landing Road as a potential site for the sports center development that was authorized by a grant, but that's still some years away.
Okay. And the other thing, a couple other things that I'll talk about that changes from 17 months ago, I'll address when we talk about the staffing. But I think one of the big things is sort of the elephant in the room is the impact that COVID-19 has had on the city and revenue sources and things like that. And again, I'll address that when we get to the staffing issue. I think that's pretty much it. So I'm actually think it's good that we're having this review and have a chance to look better at the programming for a 1-station, a 2-station, and taking into account response times and things like that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ransom.
I'm very pleased that we're having the review as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Cronin and Mr. Ewell, for being with this issue now and having been with it for many years, still able to give us the diligent presentations that you all have. I echo all of council's sentiments on how important response times are. So I was hoping if we could go back to the temporary usage plan slide for one moment. I had a question on the vehicle maneuverability and then the accessibility of vehicles if a call were to come at 3 a.m. And there was a particular point made earlier in our call about the orange dot that I don't know if it was addressed today, but I found it to be important, if you wouldn't mind quickly speaking towards that. And then, of course, the maneuverability of vehicles to get into that public maintenance facility, the vehicle maintenance facility.
Great questions. The orange dot is the location that they would place a medic unit in the evening hours, so when people are not there in the parking lot, and that would allow night response times to be quick by just down the hall, down the stair, and right into the vehicle. That's the intent there. The vehicles in the apparatus, in the bays of the Public Works garage, I think would need to be staged into the bays that allow the engine obviously has a larger turning radius than the medics and the battalion vehicle. So they'd just be staged into the ones, obviously the ones closest down, good point, to the bottom south there have a tighter turning radius, so they'd place the vehicle, the larger vehicles in the upper bays.
Okay,
Great
thank you.
point.
Additionally, I was curious, where'd the question go? With your history in designing and overseeing projects of rebuilding fire stations, it's in the future, but can you ballpark an estimate of how long it might be if we are to just do a Station 1 or to do a Station 1 and 2 simultaneously, in which we are in these temporary facilities?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that procurement is anticipated to be essentially design build procurement, PPEA procurement. So that leaves a design chunk of time, which wouldn't be any disruption to current operations. So that would be probably realistically be potentially 6 months, 3 to 6 months, just to go through both design, all the approval process have to go through ARB, et cetera. So there'd be a chunk of time there. And then during that time, the renovations would be taking place to kind of prepare for temporary facilities and to get ready to do the staging. For example, if the generators move to the municipal building, that'll have to be done almost overnight. And then potentially. And then the building construction of the station itself for the first station, if we're just the first station, I think could be done in as little as 12 months. It depends on the contractor. We were just talking today about and actually Towano Fire Station had the same situation where the contractor the low bidder took way longer than when projected. So obviously this is critical to keep that as short as possible. If you go to 2 stations construction, it depends as Ted had alluded to, if you do sequential construction, then you're essentially trying to build one, finish it, move things over there, and then build the second one, which wouldn't disrupt the operation of the first station while the second one's being built. But so in terms of disruption, it probably wouldn't have any more impact than just the construction of the one station. So the overall process would take longer. It would be more expensive because you've got more general conditions time to stretch out construction, the overall construction from, say, 12 months of construction to 18, 20, 24 months. So you know, $100 a month times whatever those numbers are, result in more cost to do it that way. And so you'd have to weigh the benefit of really how much benefit do you get out of being able to move some vehicles and people versus, say, using temporary facilities as you might. Thank
you.
Good question, too. Yep.
And my final question is that one of the good points that Councilwoman Ramsey rose was that if you are to rebuild entirely almost the Station 1, it's likely going to cost less potentially than just a renovation of that station. Would you all say that there are potential savings that could be found if there was a construction of Station 1 and 2 rather than a Station 1 now and a potential construction for a Station 2 in the future?
Yes, there would certainly be some savings. I mean, assuming that construction prices do vary, and you can catch the time we built the municipal building, we were in a dip in the economy, and that came in, I think, $1 million under budget at the time. So there are times that those happen, but generally they tend to creep up over time. And the remobilization, the separate, all those kind of additional costs that you get with doing 2 separate projects would result in definitely more costs to do 2 separate ones. But the other part that we haven't yet addressed is the staffing cost question, and that impacts all of these things too. So doing them separately, the benefit of that would be it would give you more time to deal with the increased staffing that it seems like is required for that. Whereas if you build them now, you might save some capital costs, but you incur the operational costs. So.
Right, and that figure for the adequate staffing of Stations 1 and 2, was it $1.2 million, I believe, for the staffing?
We're going to talk about that next, Councilman.
That comes immediately soon, yeah.
Thank you.
So I think I have a fairly good grasp on construction cost versus renovation cost. You know, I'm of the mind that we probably could renovate that space. I think the value of that renovation cost is not as great as tearing it down and rebuilding, just because of the quality of the end product. And I think what we're trying to do is to create a station here that will last another 50 years. And I think if we get into this building and try to renovate it, we may not get that longevity. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's generally the case, yeah. And there are compromises. In renovating an existing facility, you're stuck with some things that you can't change. So the spaces that are on the left side of the station there are still the spaces on the left side of the station. So per the $5.2 million budget, you still got those there. So there's some constraints that that you can't really change. There's some things that we were able to address by potentially widening the bays, but you still have a station that's already 43 years old in its overall, and you still have things like insulation that are hard to change in the walls. So that results in more operating costs because you're spending more on energy costs going forward as well.
Trying to build around the EOC, I think you pointed out, it would limit what we do with the new built part of that building by trying to preserve that. So
yes.
Looking for an overall better product, it's better to demolish the whole thing.
So it's generally quicker and which saves you time, less interruption of your operation of the fire department, and it's just more efficient, so it's going to be less cost to actually build it if you just tear it down and rebuild it. Unfortunately, I'd hate to do that, but it's quicker and cheaper.
Chief Eagle, I know you weren't here when we did the GIS study, but that study demonstrated that response times would improve if we added that station, the second station. I think that's the general consensus. Do you know if we did any modeling of what response time would look like if we did have that second station and our apparatus and staff were divided to support that second station? What would happen to response times as a result of that on other parts of the city? Because it seems to me that if we took a medic unit and put it at Station 2, it could potentially increase response times on the other part of town. Is that a fair statement? And did we do any analysis on that?
We did not do any analysis of that back during the original study. We have since gone back and done some of that, and based on our last 3 years call load, about a little over half of the time the second medic would be responding back into the first due, because medic 10, our medic that's at headquarters, would be tied up on another call, and it would increase response times for a little over half of the calls that they would respond on.
I think that's a major fallacy in the previous discussion that we had, is we didn't look at the consequence of improving response times by adding that station, or what the impact actually would be. And I think moving forward, I think that's something we need to have, is to get that data and then do some additional analysis. So that was a major thing that's changed for me. The other thing I think it's changed in terms of response time and call volumes is James City County has made some adjustments in their staffing at Station 3 particularly. Is that a true statement?
Yes, sir. They, in preparations for their Station 6 that was supposed to be constructed on Centerville, they had requested 18 positions and been approved for 17, and they were bringing those personnel along so that they would be trained and ready to go when the station was built. They've hired 12 of those, is my understanding. So when the station got delayed due to the current economic conditions, they kept those 12 people, and they have utilized them to better reach an NFPA recommended staffing level, and to also, their plan is to add an engine at Station 3 to help with the large number of calls that they have in that area, which has reduced the number of mutual aid responses that we have had back into the county. probably by half. We don't know 100% because with COVID, it's really skewed our numbers the past few months, and the past few months is when they started doing this, so we don't have a long enough period of time to see the true effect of that, but we think based on what we're seeing that it will cut those number of calls back into the county in half. So we ran almost 600 calls into the county, into James City County. We ran just under 300 into York County, and we think by them utilizing those 12 people and better taking care of the current call load that they have, that we will see numbers closer to what we see in York County. So somewhere around 300 so number of calls.
And I don't bring that issue up because I regret having to do that. I think, part of the benefit of in this tri-community area is the mutual aid that we all share and exchange amongst one another. And that's another thing I don't think that we really accounted for when we did the previous GIS study, determine response times and call volumes, is how much mutual aid comes back and forth, and the opportunity in terms of where other stations were located. One of the looming issues that I still have is with the second station on Capitol Landing Road is first due in parts of York County, Rochambeau, Airport Road, Bruton High out there, the interstate. I suspect that there will be a fair amount of calls that would take our apparatuses further out of the city, which then would increase response times to Station 1, who would have to backfill and almost pull double duty, or then requires to take in more mutual aid from our partners. Is that a fair statement?
It very well could. I don't know. It would depend on how we structure the mutual aid model, but it would absolutely increase the number of calls into the county as part of the mutual aid. We don't know exactly how much that would be.
Right. There could be some modeling done, and I understand with the CAD system amongst the chiefs, you all can have that some agreement as to who would be on first call. But I think we would not want to be a city that didn't respond first if we were there to do so, just because of an agreement that said, no, even though we're closer, we're going to make you go, drive past us to get to this accident and put, lives in peril. I don't think, it seems like something we wouldn't want to participate in. So, and I say that because I think we're going to be out there, and I think that's going to cause us to have increased response times here in the city where we get most of the calls.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct in that York County Station 3 is about 1.5 miles from the Capitol Landing location, and a large part of York County, they would have to come right by the station or right behind the station to get to those parts of the county.
Sure. And if there was a structural fire on Merrimack Trail, I would suspect Station 3 in York County would respond to that as well.
Yes, they would be automatic aid to respond to that.
So it's not, and I take some umbrance with the volunteer firefighters' letter to say that that area is underserved. I think for 44 years in a single station, we have done an adequate job to ensure the safety of all the residents of Williamsburg and some of the neighboring jurisdictions with the one station. And I think that's a little sensational to drive home their message. So just a little side commentary. The other thing that's changed is the economy, the ability to pay for $20 million. Maybe we can do it, maybe we can borrow, but we still have to do it. And we have other capital projects that are coming up, middle school, high school, and with a declined economy, the burden's going to fall back on us as taxpayers. And I think that's something we need to be aware of. So thank you for the discussion on the building. If anybody else has any questions.
Well, I was just going to piggyback onto your comment about the mutual aid and what Chief Eagle said about Fire Station number 3. I think James City County overall has sort of changed their model for mutual aid, and that might be helpful to explain too, as far as the impact on our call volume.
So sure, we discussed just a little bit about the 12 extra people that they've put on duty and how that's giving them more people. So what that does is allows them to be on other fire apparatus so that so what used to happen was if they were already out on a call, then we would go immediately and take the next call. Now they have more people with more apparatus ready to go so that when that initial unit is gone, they still have more people that can respond, which has freed us up to take care of the city calls and not be out in the county.
And I think you also commented that one of the reasons they were doing this was because it gave them a better data to fully analyze their requirements, both for station equipment and staff. And I would think us not having as many mutual aid calls would give us the same responsibility, the same capability to sort of check our citywide responsibilities.
That's correct.
Responses.
And they're also, rather than calling us, they're utilizing sometimes it's a little bit further, but depending on the call, they are going ahead and taking that rather than depending on us to take that call. And kind of level up that mutual automatic aid agreement to make it more level across the board.
And one last thing, again, on Mayor Ponce's comment about the mutual aid to York County, if we got into making some of those calls to I-64, I think you had told me that there was different type of equipment and training that our staff might need to have.
Yeah, I think the majority of our folks have the training already. We do have a truck we call the Squad. It's basically an engine that has extra storage space and extra equipment that will allow them to, for instance, cut a car open to rescue someone out of that. So our plan would be to utilize the Squad at our Station 2 because of the vicinity to the interstate. And we feel there would be a need for us out on the interstate.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
Basil?
Did you have any follow-up? So I think it's great that James City County's changing some of their staffing models. And to the degree we're not sending a medic unit so much into James City County reduces the chance that our first due medic in this area is out of service, which may, to Mayor Pond's previous call, mean that there's less coming from Station 2 to cover something because we'll have that medic available. We also know that, in terms of your working with the other fire chiefs, a big department like James City County can also backfill a station, backfill their station if they're all out from, say, Station 4 maybe, or Station 5. And that helps us avoid being called in for the next call.
Yeah, you could actually, absolutely, if Medic 10 is already out on a call, you could bring them over to Station 1. I don't know that you would do that on every call, but if they were tied up on a significant longer tenure or longer term incident, that's when that generally happens.
And we've been fortunate because really all three fire departments grew up together. Back when this station opened, we were protecting 100 square miles. And then the county started adding more stations. So we were handling all the accidents out on 64. I don't think there are many accidents on 64. And I know that the last one that I remember was the fog one. And it was our paramedics that took the most critical patients to Richmond. So to your point, we've got the expertise, as well as the other departments. So I think that's important. And then I think in terms of how you set up the auto dispatch system, in terms of where you want the units to come from, that's between you and the other chiefs. For example, I think one creative way was, we know that the courthouse is in the city of Williamsburg. We know that William and Mary's Plumery Park, the baseball field, is in James City County. Well, the chiefs got together and say, hey, we'll swap. James City County will be first due into the courthouse, we'll be first due into Plumery Park. So I think there's that flexibility that can be worked out. Take a look at the helicopter accident in Bristol Commons a couple years ago. How many communities our size could immediately get 3 tower or ladder trucks to a scene like that? When there's a structure fire, all 3 departments are responding, which is great. So that's all I have.
Let's move on to the employee requirements, if we can.
Okay, we're going to move into staffing here. I just want to say that I've been here right at 9 months now, and one of the reasons I came was because of the amazing support that this community has for the public safety, and also a world-class community, and the opportunity to build a second station, to remodel a first, to redo a first was extremely appealing to me. As a chief for over 12 years in another community, one of the highlights was remodeling, redoing, building new properties to bring the efficiencies, to bring the safety aspects of those new designs, and to be able to provide an incredible workforce, an environment that they deserve. So I was extremely excited about that, and when I got here, one of the first tasks I was asked to do was to do programming on the second, to get the PPEA, the RFP ready to go out, and to see what we would need to do to make the project, the second station, as well as the first station, to get it moving along. And we made pretty good progress on that. I saw that some programming had been done on Station 1. What I found, we took the same team of firefighters that did the original programming under the past administration, and we brought them back in. We did the programming for Station 2, and what we found was there was not enough money to do both projects. So we went back, we brought the team back in, we said, all right, what can we do with, what can we do without? We cut it down a little bit, and did away with the wants versus the needs, and trimmed it as much as we could. And what I found was we didn't have enough money, and I was told that they already knew that, or you knew that, or the past administration already knew that, and there was discussions that was the case, that we would need to borrow money. And what I also found was we didn't really have a true staffing plan to adequately staff the second fire station. So I was asked to look at that and put that together, and I used my nearly 26 years of experience, plus a little bit of volunteer experience, as well as my knowledge of NFPA, the Insurance Service Office, which determines our insurance ratings. I looked at the accreditation model. I looked at other departments and what they were doing. I looked at the IAFF, which is the union, and what they recommend for staffing. And I put together what staffing was needed to make the project move forward in a safe, adequate, and efficient way. So I'll start by looking at where we are now. So each of these blue boxes, if you will, are fire trucks, fire engines, fire apparatus, and each of the circle, the city seals, represents a personnel of the minimum personnel that's required to make it work, to be adequate, to do it safe, to do what the best practice and the industry standard recommends that you have to run a career fire department. When I got here, we had a minimum staffing of 8 people, about 66% of the time, and then we had 10 people minimum staffing about 2/3 of the time, and we had a minimum of 8 people 1/3 of the time. So what we did immediately was we took our firefighter ALS technicians and we put them on an A, B, and C shift to bolster up our shift. We took the one person that y'all gave us back in January, I think it was, and we had already rotated one position over into operations, which took us to a minimum staffing of 10 people. So what you see here is what we currently have. It's 42 FTEs. That's where we are right now, and that's our minimum staffing. So if you will, B10 is our shift supervisor. That's Battalion 10. It's staffed with our one shift commander. Engine 10 is the second box. We staff it with 4 with a minimum of 3. That extra person is someone that may be off. Maybe they got injured and they're off for a significant amount of time. Maybe they're off on vacation, maybe they're off on training, maybe someone has retired, maybe someone has left for whatever the reason, but that's the extra person that we have. So maximum of 4, minimum of 3 on engine 10. The next box represents tower 10. Right now, we're only able to staff it with 2, which in my opinion, and based on best practice, IAFF, iChiefs, ISO, NFPA, you should have 4 on that apparatus as well. Right now we have 2. When I got here, there were periods of time where we had 2 on the tower, and if a medic call came in, they got off of the tower and got on the medic unit and responded on the second medic, which is M20, medic 20, which in my experience, I'm not used to doing that. Apparently that's been a practice here, but it does not go along with the industry best practice. And it could be considered dangerous or irresponsible, but I'm not going to question how that's done. It's done in this part of the country, or I'm sorry, this part of the region. I don't know anywhere else that does it except for right here in the peninsula and just the north side of the peninsula. So what we were able to do by putting 10 is to at least staff the tower all the time and have the medic 20 staffed all the time, which is medic 20 is utilized often and needs somebody on it 24/7. So we were able to do that with the people that you all approved already. And basically what we're recommending is to take it from the 42 FTEs that we have now to 46 FTEs. 46 FTEs, you've heard us talk about the SAFER grant, and in just a minute I'll get into the SAFER grant and how we propose to pay for these people. But what 46 personnel would allow us to do is go to 13 people per shift, operational shift. That's a minimum of 11 people. That would still allow us to have 2 off through attrition, training, annual leave, sick leave, or whatever it may be. It would allow us to rotate the one position that was an operational position that we rotated in. I mean, it was an administration position that we rotated into operations to fit a need. It would allow us to rotate one of those positions back so that we can start addressing the council GIOs of the Mobile Integrated Health Program, which now has grown and is even more important with COVID and with pandemics and with some of the things that we're seeing now. That mobile integrated health is even more important to have someone that can kind of focus on that area, kind of work on CERT. And some of the areas that we're doing, we're just not doing as good of a job as our citizens deserve and as we feel like we can do. So the 4 positions through the SAFER grant, what that does is allow us to put that 3rd person on the tower truck. And it'll look like this. Basically, just like you saw now, but you see a 3rd additional person on the tower. So Battalion 10 is 1, Engine 10 would be 4 with a minimum of 3, which you see. Tower 10 would be 4 with a minimum of 3, which you see, and we would be able to staff both our Medic 10 and our Medic 20 with 2 people 24/7, 365 days a year. So it puts us that much closer to meeting NFPA requirements. If everybody's there, we do meet NFPA requirements. The way we propose to plan for it, and we've already applied for the grant, we feel very confident in getting the grant. SAFER stands for Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response. Basically, it is a federal grant program through Homeland Security that will pay for 75% of the personnel costs the first 2 years. It'll drop to 35% the 3rd year, and then the 4th year and every subsequent year, the city's required to pick that up. if we decide to keep those positions. So you see how much that represents. Those 4 firefighters, the federal share is $225,000 with the city share of $75,000 for the first 2 years. It drops to $105,000 federal and $195,000 the third year, and then it goes up to roughly $300,000 for those 4 positions for every year thereafter. Now, during COVID, the question came up. There is a plan out there right now where the federal government is, for some departments that can show the need, that they're waiving the 25% city cost share for those first 2 years. Now, in talking with our consultants that helped us with our grant, their resources told them that if we tried to do that and could not show a hard enough need, that we would not be as successful. So we made the decision in-house that we would still honor the 25% cost share that the grant generally requires, that would make us much more marketable and have a much better chance of getting those positions. All right, so now we go into the second station. It's not feasible to just take the number of people we have and split them out and run 2 stations. It's not really safe or efficient to do that. The best way to do that, or maybe not the best way, but the easiest way we can do that is to do what's called a quint concept. A quint concept is utilizing the ladder company that you have and utilizing them to do both engine and ladder functions. Now, what you give up when you do that is ISO only gives you 50% credit for your ladder, which isn't a huge deal. It would not drop our ISO rating. It'll make it a little harder for us to improve our ISO rating, but it will not drop our ISO rating. And the reason for that is ISO says that truck can only be an engine or a ladder. It can't be both. So if you are responding as a ladder, then you're waiting on the engine from Station 2 to come over to provide the extra manpower that you need to do that, to do the firefighting functions that are necessary. I think that in practicality, you can do it. It's not what NFPA recommends, but there are departments that use quint concepts. What I would recommend is adding 1 more person so that we could have a 4-man quint, because they are doing, even though ISO says they're doing one or the other, they are, for a period of time until help arrives, they are doing both engine company and ladder company work. And the amount of work that needs to be done to do it safely and not just completely wear out the responders and make it an unsafe situation for them, we need people to do that. Now, we got them coming through our automatic aid partners. We covered that really well. But my recommendation would be to staff it with 5. There's never going to be 5 there because there's always going to be somebody off. Right now, we have trouble getting people off because we don't have enough personnel with our minimum staffing to sometimes let people off. So we've had to deny training because we haven't had enough staffing. So what this would do would give us some flexibility. It would staff the tower with 5 with a minimum of 4. It would be 3 more personnel. It would allow us to have 3 officers at Station 2, which we absolutely have to have 3 more officers, an A shift, B shift, C shift officer for ladder 2. And then we would need to look at Tower 10, because Tower 10, although it has some of the functions of a quint, it's not totally set up to run as a quint. It's a very, very large specialized piece. It has a little bit of trouble maneuvering in some of the areas in the downtown district where it would need to be serving as an engine. And it would need to, we'd have to redo some of the equipment and make some adjustments to make it work as a quint. So what that would do is give us 14 per shift, minimum of 12. Same difference, and you see in red, it would add 1 person to the quint. And this is what it would look like. Downtown, you would have a quint with 4 on it. You would have 2 on the medic, 1 on the battalion, and then you would have 4 on the engine, 2 on the medic at Station 2, and then you would have 2 off, still allow for 2 off, which is most of the time. If you go to adequate staffing based on best practice, based on industry standard, based on IAFF recommendations, iChief recommendations, ISO recommendations, and everybody else in the industry, when you build a new station, generally you're looking at an engine and a medic, and then the station Station 1 would also need an engine and a medic, and then you would have 1 ladder that runs the entire area. So in order to do that, we would need to add 3 more employees on 3 more FTEs, full-time equivalent, on each shift for a total of 9, which is 17 per shift, 14 personnel minimum per shift, which would allow us now to get 3 people off. And what that would look like is 1 on the battalion, 4 on the engine with a minimum of 3, 4 on the tower with a minimum of 3, 2 on the medic, 10, 4 on engine 20 with a minimum of 3, and then 2 on medic 20. Some of the benchmarks that I talked about, NFPA 1710 is the main one that most of these people utilize. The 2008 station location study that Dr. Kramer did for the city that we contracted with, that I think all of you have now received a copy of. I don't think that was presented at the time, but they recommended that in 2018, back then we were 8 per shift, 3 years, which is coming up, 2021, 13, which is what I proposed with the SAFER grant. And then 10 years from now, they said we should be at 21 minimum per shift. My plan has us at, I think it improved us by 16 people. James City County, just as a comparison, we talked a little bit earlier, their Station 6 that was planned for Centerville Road has been delayed due to the economy to 2027. But out of the 17 that were approved, they've already hired 12 of those. So one of the ideas is that they have a quint that they run out of Station 3 that's located on John Tyler Highway. They are trying to do away with the quint model because they weren't able to handle all the call load and put an engine and a ladder at that station. And then they're also able to staff one of their medics a little bit better. I think they were taking somebody off an engine, putting it on a medic, and running the engine and medic together, and now they're able to utilize those extra staffing that they got to better serve the James City County community. So basically, current staffing with the ones you gave us recently, 42. Adequate staffing for a 1-station model is 46 people, $300,000, with that being offset by the SAFER. 2-station model, for a short period of time to get us going, we can use the quint concept. Takes us up to 49 FTEs. We can apply for a SAFER grant again if we want to and see how that goes. But the ongoing continuous cost would be about $525,000 to the general budget. 2-station model with adequate staffing based on industry best practice would be 58 FTEs, which runs it up to about $1.2 million. And again, that's an ongoing reoccurring cost. And again, we could apply for a SAFER grant again and hope that we get it. So in saying all that, before we get into the next, I'll entertain any questions, but staffing is extremely important to the workload of our employees and to the safety of our employees. And I don't want to sensationalize that at all, but I would love to build your 2nd station, and I really want to build your 3rd station. I know we're not there yet, but to give this community total coverage that meets the industry best practice. Most cities can't do that, but to do that, we've got to have the staffing to do it in a safe and efficient and adequate way. So that's staffing, and I'll entertain any questions that you may have.
Vice Mayor?
Thanks, Chief, for the presentation. One thing on the adequate staffing for the vacant technical assistant, that's actually not a vacant position. That you requested a full-time FTE.
Actually, that was Eric Stone's position when he was in the office as admin. When he left, that position was moved over into operations as a firefighter position. And then what we're recommending is to move it back over and to replace that position with the safer grant position, move someone else over in to handle some of those GIOs that council has come up with.
Yeah, so essentially, because I think it was 2019, council approved a half a position to make that, to give it the benefits of a contract position to move it over to operations. So essentially, it's another full-time FTE to bring that position back to.
Yes, correct.
To
You're
admin.
absolutely correct. So basically, we're rolling we made that half position a full position. We added the half to it when we moved it over to operations. And now we're just moving it back over and replacing it with the safer grant position.
Okay.
Correct.
So obviously, you covered in detail the various ways to staff apparatus, but just so people watching and that are here listening, even at the 46 FTEs, that's not meeting the full requirements of 1710. Is that correct?
That's correct. I don't know that we could ever fully meet 1710. So 1710 not only talks about response times, it talks about that 8-minute, and it talks about that 4-minute that we discussed in some of the questions earlier, but it also talks about 4 people on fire apparatus. And so this puts us a little bit closer to that. So I think everybody shoots for trying to meet the benchmark some of the time or as much as they can. But no, we would not be able to adopt NFPA 1710 in its entirety. Our goal is just to try to meet it more often than not, and this puts us a little bit closer to that benchmark.
So you hit on the point I was going to make, was that there's not a lot of localities, especially in the Hampton Roads region, that are able to afford meeting 1710 in its entirety. Again, to your point, it doesn't mean that you don't strive for it, but there's not many localities that can meet 1710 based on the current standards. So you've detailed how you could get closer to that. And I think there's a lot of different options that could staff the second station. And to your point on the staffing benchmarks on what was provided from the Kramer study was also, as you already pointed out, on page 15 of the Kramer study, also recommended in order to provide adequate response times for equally to all communities that we needed 3 fire stations. And I know there's other localities in the Commonwealth that are similar in size that even have more than 3. But so my point is while all of this is important, staffing's important, taking care of staff is important. There's still a need to address the response times, and we're at a critical point where, in my opinion, if we build a 31,378 square foot Station 1 now, there'll never be the opportunity in the near future to address that second station just based on funding. And several of the citizens that have contacted me, obviously, as the mayor pointed out and Councilman Ramsey about the economy, is saying, could we address the current station as it now, and then in 4 or 5 years readdress the need for a second station. So that's why I tried to point out, earlier when Mr. Cronin was at the podium, is a 31,378 square foot station. If it's the 2 additional bays, is there an opportunity for us to build what would be the the station one of the two-station project. So at some point down the road, we still have that opportunity. We've not invested all of our money in that and still not have addressed the issue with response times. Because I do think that's a critical factor. And, you know, I know that there's growth in, you know, High Street and Midtown Row. But we're also talking about, as was pointed out by some of the citizens, apartment complexes and townhouse complex that have access issues already for fire apparatus that I would like us to at least consider, if this council decides that right now a two-station option is not on the table, that we at least take a look at the programming and not, again, put all of our all of our eggs in that one basket and not have the opportunity 4 or 5 years down the road when the economy recovers, that we couldn't take a look at a second station. And maybe, as Mayor Pons had pointed, maybe it's not Capitol Landing Road that gets addressed next, but I certainly think that's an area that's deficient in response times, as Councilman Maslin pointed out with EMS and fire response times. So I think it's critical that we not forget that response times is just as important, as the chiefs pointed out, as the staffing portion of it. And again, in comparison to James City Station 1, that's a 21,000 square foot station. And if, you know, I've had the opportunity to be in it, and if you ride by it, it's a huge station. So that's all I have.
Mr. Maslin?
So what is the nature of the attrition? How much attrition are you having?
About 10% of 40 people.
So is that means you've got 4 people leaving every year?
A lot of them, we've lost 4 in the 8 months I've been here. New recruits that we can't get through the academy. So some of it is that. We reached a time where we had heavy retirements, but now we're relatively young. So part of the retention is keeping those. A lot of them are leaving for various reasons, whether it's going to another industry or going to another fire department. Some is advancement opportunities, some is more fire experience, some is better opportunities with special operations and different things like that. Some is just the dollar. If they can go to the neighbor next door and make a few dollars more, then they're going to do that, especially if they're driving anywhere in the Hampton Roads area.
So a previous city manager, I remember, if he saw that there was going to be attrition coming up, especially retirements, he would allow overhiring. So it wouldn't add to the budget, but it would keep you, full. Also, there's been no mention of overtime. How do you use overtime to fill in the gaps?
Our overtime has been up. We've utilized overtime quite a bit to fill gaps. We have overhired once since I've been here in the 9 months. So we are doing that. We're looking at all different opportunities to keep the good people that we have and make it a better environment for them, make it better opportunities for them. So we're looking at everything we can do to try to make it a career of choice here. And now we have a different generation of workers than we used to have, so a lot of them are bouncing around. It's hard to keep good folks grounded into one department like departments did, and that's industry-wide. It's not just here in Williamsburg.
So one of the things we talked about, benchmarking other local departments, and for example, James City County Fire Station 5, which responds to 2 of the major senior living communities, and I think you told me that they have 2 on the engine and 2 on the medic in that station?
That's one of the stations where they have 2 and 2 and they run together.
Right.
To get their 4. But what happens is when that medic does the transport, it leaves only 2 on that engine. So it puts them in a situation where they have to wait for other people to get there to do any type of interior work. So with the extra 12 people that they've gotten, they've put an extra person on that engine, is my understanding of one of the things they've done to shore up that. The other is to add an engine that they're working on doing at Station 3, I believe it is.
So, and then also, I think maybe it was York County opening up a new station that maybe they staffed it initially with an ALS engine. So they had a paramedic, and our department has a good percentage of paramedics, correct?
Correct, yes.
So is that an option to have a paramedic engine?
We run paramedic engine now. Yes, we can do that. Most of the time we can do that. We still have, I don't know, 20% are probably EMT only. But generally we have a paramedic on the engine as well as the medic units. Is that 20%? Maybe a little less than 20% are EMT onlys. We've been trying to require everybody to be a paramedic, but there are some people that aren't interested, or it helps with our recruiting and our retention to have some that are just EMTs, and I think sometimes you need just EMT firefighters. So, but yes, we have used a ALS engine. They have what they need on there to run it as an ALS engine.
So we had the opportunity this weekend to read through about 350 pages of reports, some of which we'd never seen before. And one of the reports, I think, was creative and saying, why don't we look at a combination pumper ambulance? You remember that picture?
I have seen that before. I don't know enough about it to recommend that.
And the comment quickly said it's not advisable because of the contamination issues.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that the consultants would show you a picture of that. So that's all I had.
Usually places that do that do not have ambulances. They run that in lieu of an ambulance as a stopgap to have something rather than nothing as far as a transport.
Ramsey?
Thank you. And thank you, Chief Eagle, and I will not belabor some of the things that have already been discussed. I did have one question. You mentioned about SAFER grants. Is that something that you can apply for current hires, or is it only for new hires? Because you made it sound we could apply again, so.
So, yeah, so we applied for 4. If we want to apply for 8 more a year from now, we can certainly do that. So they open that up once a year, and the whole goal of it is to try to get closer to NFPA recommendations, which is 4 on all the fire apparatus. So we certainly could show that we still need people, and we could certainly apply again in subsequent years. Now, I don't know, how that helps or what our chances would be, but we can certainly continue to do that.
And regardless of how many SAFER grants we got, and we would still be responsible in the 4th year for there on out. So
Yes.
We're still talking about significant money to keep the staffing where you need it to be. And when we talked, I know there are issues with recruiting and retaining for the one station for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. So I would think it'd be even doubly harder to recruit and retain for 2 stations, particularly with the revenue, with the limits we have on some of the salary and benefits that we can pay our firefighters.
I don't know the answer to that. I do know that it would allow for 3 more promotable positions, which would be enticing to keep some people. It would also give us a slower station that only runs, a smaller amount, maybe 20% of the call load, Some people like that, some like the real busy station. It would give us some flexibility in that regard. But yes, you know, I don't know how it would affect us otherwise as far as keeping people. Yes, we would need to get them and train them and try to keep them any way that we can.
Yeah.
If not, then the overtime question comes back up because we have to meet the minimum staffings.
Yes, and I think that from best practices, it sounds like that most stations try to have the staff before they build the station. And like to James City County, it allows them now a lot of flexibility until they get that next station built in, well, I guess it'll be 7 years. And you mentioned the Quint, and you had said that due to its size, it wouldn't be maneuverable in certain neighborhoods. I live on Griffin Avenue, which is a dead end. How would it operate there or not?
It's a very large piece. It would do great on a large dormitory or Midtown Row or some of these tall buildings. It really was not designed it was really designed the way it is because of our station limitations that Mr. Newell talked about. We had to design it a certain way is one reason. I'm sure there was lots of other reasons, but one reason that it's the design that it is because you were limited on what you could do because of the height of the bay and getting in the doors. But yes, it's extremely, it's not a maneuverable piece. It's about a 50-foot long apparatus. It's a heavy apparatus. It has it's a great apparatus for when you need the tower, but it's not designed to be an everyday run on everything engine type of piece, so to speak. So I do foresee the maintenance going way up and the replacement of it coming much earlier. I would recommend keeping it as a special piece and looking at replacing it with a true Quint model, which is roughly 1.1, 1.2 million. You can get them now with rear steer and other things that really allows you to maneuver it much better in some of those areas that you speak of.
So for new equipment and for the staffing, that would really fall on the residents of Williamsburg to make up any shortfall from our revenue sources, our typical revenue sources, which are really being impacted now from COVID-19 and likely into 2021 as well.
The Quint would be a capital piece, so it would be the debt on the capital, but the ongoing staffing, what I heard tonight, there's, people really think we need those people. So,
yeah.
I mean, if that's truly the case, I hope you'll consider all the staffing.
Right. Thank you.
Rogers?
Thank you very much, Chief Eagle, as well, and Deputy Chief Snyder for your comments, too. I'm too curious about the SAFER grant. Very encouraged to hear that it sounds like it's highly likely that we'll receive that funding. Briefly, what's the timeline there? Is it an October, November general time frame that we may hear back?
I'm going to refer to Mr. Trivett. I know he has a consultant that he has had contact with that we think in the fall of this year.
Yeah, the latest that we heard was October.
Okay.
They've done their initial review. Our consultant feels like we're a good contender.
Okay. What do you find are the departmental norms on the likelihood of receiving funding if they're to apply 2 years in a row, or if they're to apply 1 year with 4 and the next year with 12, if we were to try to reach that adequate staffing level?
I don't know the answer
Big
to
jump.
that. I do know there are departments around us, New Kent, York County, several close neighbors who have received at least one. I think York has received, I know they've had at least one, if not two.
Okay.
So there are departments that do receive more than one. Being the size that we are, I don't know if that hurts us, because the whole goal is to try to get as much, is to meet that 4 on every unit is really the main goal of that SAFER grant.
Okay. And then
We can try to get some information on that for you.
Okay, thank you. On response times, with the entirety almost of the conversation around Station 2 being the response times and the average that we're trying to reach there, What's the difference in deliverables having a Quint concept as opposed to the adequate staffing concept, in which in both cases there are people staffing the medic and the engine in what would be a Station 2?
All right, I'm not sure I follow the question, but as far as the Quint,
Essentially saying there's a great deal of staffing that would have come with the adequate staffing, 58. The Quint concept is at 49. What's the difference in deliverable to the area
okay.
with that differential in staffing, even though the response times would theoretically be the same, having a medic and an engine?
So as I stated, the insurance service office that sets your insurance rates only counts it as one or the other, because generally there's not enough staffing to do everything that needs to be done from a ladder. A ladder generally does one set of skills where an engine does another. So you can kind of try to do it all at the expense of the staff that are doing it. But when you have both, it makes it much more efficient. It provides that service much quicker. They can do it in rapid sequence. They don't have to do multiple duties and try to complete one task before they get to the other. It gets them less time in the environment, the hot zone that we heard about, that exposes them for longer periods of time to the carcinogens, so it makes it much safer by having enough people to do all the skills that you have. So by having an engine and a ladder, now you're going to have an engine coming, and you're going to have people from our neighbors coming. But there's, the goal is to have them there quickly and have enough people there quickly to do everything that needs to be done. So. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, it sounds like, response times would likely be the same. It's a reduction of risk on staff.
Absolutely.
What you have. Okay.
That's one of the main things, and part of our turnover and part of the whole conversation about the station was the workload and the number of calls and how much work the few people we had to do. So that is a critical piece when you're considering this, is to have enough staff to make it all work.
Okay. Thank you.
So, thank you for that. There's no question that we need more staff. Even at a single station today, we need more staff to handle what we're doing. And as the department grows, the need for staff is going to grow. And so using the SAFER grants helps us pay for some of these new employees potentially for up to 3 years. And after the third year, it falls solely on us. And if we were looking at 1.2 million, that equates to a 6-cent increase in tax to support those employees, because every penny is about $200,000. So that's a lot of money. And again, that's just the staffing, not even talking about building a new building and the impact that that's going to have. So, and I say that because I want the community to understand that where we're heading is going to be a significant burden on the city in terms of financials. Not that it's not necessary, there's just going to be a cost to it, and we need to be prepared for that. Okay, so, all right, so anybody else have anything on staffing? So you want to move forward now to finances relative to this, Mr. Trivett?
Sure. So the City Council asked us to talk about the financing that is available and recommendations for moving forward. So just a quick summary here on this slide. In 2017, we issued that series of bonds. It totaled $21.8 million. A big portion of that was used to refund existing debt, essentially restructure it. And then the fees associated with the issuance of around $300,000 left $13 million to do the public safety project. Over the period of 17, 18, 19, and 20, we made progress in terms of structuring that money so that it could fund both projects, as well as trying to add to the balance, knowing that whatever project we decided to proceed with, the money was very tight. So this is working. There we go. Okay, good. This slide just simply gives you some idea of the projects that are on the fiscal horizon of 5 years, based on what we've talked about as a city staff and a city council in the last couple of budgets. we got the first category here of general government, the fire station project, which of course is a focus today. The police station project is right on the heels of that one. A library project is looming. Of course, as you get further out into the 5-year plan, the numbers are less certain, the project details are less certain. So we have estimated costs there, but it's impossible for us to know for sure what might be planned until the boards and the councils are able to review what the library board and the community might want, make some decisions. In the non-CIP funded category, we've got 2 projects that we've talked about. The Blayton project, which is the redevelopment of the Blayton building. We all agree that it's time to start considering that. We also agree that it's probably not a project that the city CIP can take on for lots of reasons, the list of projects being one of them. And so we're looking for a creative public-private partnership to help us fund that project in the sooner time frame than the latter time frame. We had some promising discussions with some folks who might be interested. COVID-19 hit and those conversations really slowed down, but I don't think the interest has waned. So as soon as it's a good idea to do so, we'll return back to that project and hopefully get it moving. The Regional Sports Center, we had a meeting about this today with our committee that's working on this. That's funded through tourism funding, but an important project and an expensive one nonetheless. And of course, that's not CIP funded either. And then on the school district side, which is CIP funded, what we've done is tried to simplify the school system's conversation about costs down as much as we can. And so we sort of divide those costs up into 3 different categories. The standard school system type maintenance issues, there's some minor additions or improvements included in that category, but it does not include major new construction projects. The major new construction projects we divide up into these 2 categories, elementary expansion and high school expansion. Now, we've been deliberately vague in those titles because decisions haven't been fully made on what type of expansion is required or needed, but what we can be sure of is our share will approximate these numbers regardless of what path might be chosen by the partners in the school system. So then we take that information and we try to program it out so that we can plan financially on how we might afford to do all these projects. And one of the things the council asked us to do as we put together this briefing was to do a sample CIP sheet that included some of this financial planning. And so what you can see here is that sample. Now, I've included this disclaimer at the top because this was an incredibly challenging exercise for Ms. Dameron to do, given the amount of assumptions required to get to a finished product. Because so many of these projects require city council approval, so many of these projects require design, conversations in the community, and then timing is a big component of what has to be decided. But this shows you what would happen if we tried to fit all of this in the 5-year window. And what I'm saying in the disclaimer is the numbers themselves really shouldn't be that important to you. What you should be looking at that's illustrated by this is the health of the fund. And what you can see is if we try to bite off all of these projects ourselves, very quickly the fund goes negative. And so all that illustrates is even though we have the capacity to borrow the money, we would have to address the revenue shortfall as a result of the new projects coming online. So that's something to consider in terms of timing and capacity. So then on the right side, I just wanted to summarize that as we've added over the years any carryover funding that we could to these public safety projects, we've grown the budget from 13 million to 14.5. And then under that are the financial notes. This is taken from conversations that Ms. Dameron had with our financial advisor, Davenport and Associates, about strategizing how we might borrow more money, knowing that that is the likelihood, given the fact that we have talked about a police station in the short term. And obviously, if we spend this money on a fire station solution, we're going to need to borrow more to do the police station work. And then, of course, if we decide to do a more expensive project on the fire station, then we'd have to borrow additional funds to get that done. Their advice to us was use the money you have to complete the project that's known, which would be the fire station. And then if you need to do a second borrow, do that at a time that you have the known costs in hand. So we would proceed with a borrow. I said here 2020, that might be optimistic. It might be 2021 before we would need to go do that second borrow. That would give us time to firm up costs on whatever project we might be borrowing for. So pretty straightforward and simple advice. Doesn't mean we're any less committed to the other projects. It's just a matter of prioritization. So then this just summarizes the fire station project cost, the category of capital costs. Of course, we've talked about extensively. Additional debt service of $286,000 there. Staffing costs, we've talked about that extensively too. If you decide to go with the adequate staffing path, which is I think the recommendation of the fire chief, then you would be at $900,000 in new funding annually for that. And of course, that's not considering a future SAFER grant application. And then operational costs. And those are the costs that are hardest to qualify prior to a construction project. Chief Dent and I worked through some of those numbers back in 2017 and 18, but they're fairly inconsequential. But we did want you to know they're there. Obviously, it could be a wash. A new station number one, reducing some costs, a new station altogether, increasing some costs. But again, those numbers are not going to be on the same order of magnitude as what you see in staffing and capital.
Yeah, I recall that number was like $60,000.
Right, and that was just, I mean, we found a very simple calculator that you could put in square footages and sort of calculate additional maintenance and utility cost, and that's what we did.
So this was, an exercise that some members of the city council wanted us to kind of go through just so we had an idea of some of the capital expenditures that we have on the horizon. So if there are any questions or any feedback, Manager Ted?
So, given our history in terms of issuing bonds and not doing anything them in a timely manner, which I assume most bonds have a requirement to do so, does that hurt us at all in terms of the next round of issuing bonds?
No, it doesn't. I mean, I think that the timeline for the bonds are specified in the bond process, and we've adjusted that accordingly. So no, I don't think so. And I don't think it's fair to say that it's our history that happens. In this situation, this was a very unique project with a lot of unexpected changes in personnel along the way, and we're doing the best we can in terms of moving ahead.
Thank you.
And we've communicated that to the bondholders, which is really the most important part. Very early on in the process, Ms. Dameron and I and a collection of staff went to Richmond. We consulted with Davenport. We issued new guidance to the bondholders, what was happening and why. And so we update them periodically throughout the year.
And the only question I wanted to ask is what you've listed here are sort of the big major ones, but also because of COVID-19, we've had to delay and postpone a lot of our smaller CIP projects, and that we don't know exactly when we're going to be able to bring them back, and some of them included projects for Capitol Landing Road and obviously all around the city.
Right.
So as we gain some revenue back, then obviously we'll want to pick up on those. And as you commented, the sports center is tourism funding. And right now we're not getting a lot of influx from tourists. So there are a lot of other factors to take into account too.
Absolutely. This chart, again, troublesome to put together because of the assumptions that have to be made on city council decisions, but also because we're trying to model revenues that at this point are uncertain. You can see what we tried to do to simplify what is currently, I think, 4 or 5 pages of spreadsheet. We categorize things down. So there's a line there, general CIP, that sort of captures all of those projects that you were just talking about, Ms. Ramsey. And it does reflect the changes that we made. And obviously the CIP itself, being a 5-year window, is an exercise in prioritization that City Council goes through every year. So we will have to take that on and decide what we can afford when, and try to do the best we can to catch up on projects that maybe get left behind.
Thank you.
Okay, so as you know, we have fire station conversation is going to continue on Thursday, where we may perhaps entertain a motion to proceed in a particular way. Staff has given us the information without a particular recommendation, which I think is appropriate. So that'll lead us to having to figure out how to move forward. Yeah? All right, Mr. Trivett, you want to talk to us about item B on the agenda, the GIO process moving forward?
Sure. So in the interest of time, I'll go through this as quickly as is prudent.
Are you done yet?
I'm sorry?
Are you done yet?
Right. Everybody's looking for the bathroom pretty soon, too. Goals, initiatives, and outcomes, it's that time of year where we sort of summarize where we are, and as well as talk about how we're kicking off the new process. So this is a little bit different because obviously things have changed. COVID-19 is impacting what we can and cannot do. So we wanted to come to you with some ideas and strategies. So this is the process normally. I'll skip my fancy animations as much as it pains me to do so, so we can get through it faster. But this shows you how we would normally follow the process, beginning with the National Citizen Survey, some public workshops, and move right on into adoption. We focused a lot when we did this last time on the public workshop component because we're really not getting the participation we'd like to see there. And so we've spent the last 2 years trying to reinvent that process, only to have that work thwarted by COVID-19.
I was looking forward to the balls and the
We had a really interesting and innovative plan that we were excited to roll out and see how the community reacted to it. I think many of the department heads were anxious to see how my idea would fail or flop. So hopefully they'll get that opportunity before too long. So the 2018-2020 process delivered us several different categories of GIOs, including 51 initiatives and 292 steps. The 292 steps is really important because one of the things that we decided to change in the 2018-2020 period was how we report this out to the community. We went to an online format instead of a written report, which allows them to keep up with it on a daily basis. We update the data monthly. The 292 steps were designed by the department heads on how they would accomplish the goals and initiatives that were set by council. They're able to change those whenever they'd like, change the deadlines based on what they can and cannot get done, as well as change them based on assumptions and conditions that change. And that's been important with COVID-19. The vision statement, of course, remains unchanged. That was a focus of this period's GIOs. We had really hoped to work on a new vision statement, looking forward to 2040 in Williamsburg, as well as a new goal set. And that's still our target. And we're going to talk about that as we get to the end. So now just a really quick run through of where we are in terms of the goals and the initiatives themselves. I've gone through and I've placed stamps at the bottom of each one of the goals that was adopted to let you know where we are. I have included in some of these COVID-19 delay stamps. I tried not to overuse that. I only used it where I thought it truly was an impact and what we could and couldn't get done. Mainly in terms of either the focus of staff, the focus of regional agencies, which of course has been on other things, or the need to have public meetings. So as we go through, you'll see that some of this work is done, but many of these are still in progress. And that has to do with the fact that we really have through the end of December to accomplish a lot of it. And as I said, it's step driven. And so as we go from step 1 to step 2, the goal itself is in progress, the initiatives are in progress, but maybe not 100% complete. There's a couple here that I have included needs review, and I put that on there to indicate to you that we need to have a larger conversation about that particular task, because during the process of this 2-year period, some situation changed. Either what we assumed we knew when we adopted the GIO was inaccurate, or somebody did some work and uncovered that the path we were on was not a good one. So we need to talk about that and determine what it means for the overall task. So this takes us to the punchline. This is a screenshot from our internal back end of the software that we use to report out to the community. This is how we keep track and where we change the information on a monthly basis. As you can see here, 57 of the tasks of the steps have no progress. That's not a bad indication. That just means we haven't gotten to that order in the sequence. 81 are in progress today and 154 are completed. I think that most of these we will be able to make significant progress on between now and December, assuming that COVID-19 doesn't continue to get in the way of some. So we'll see if we're successful. One of the things that we focused on as we adopted these GIOs was the need to modernize our process. It's been in place since the early 90s, and it is time to make some changes under the hood so that we can stay current and relevant. One of the things that you can see here is sort of this creative way of relating the information to the public. We've made some big strides, but there's still some work to do. A big part of that is updating that vision and goal set, which has really been our primary focus. So then, this is the timeline as it stands in terms of what we would normally do, and it follows the one that you've already seen from the last 2-year period. And I'm going to let this one play out so that you can see how it needs to be adjusted. Obviously, there's a couple of steps here that COVID-19 has interrupted, the public workshops being a component of it, and then also the NCS part of it because they were acquired by a new company. And so what we propose doing is altering the timeline to look like this. So we would present to you the National Citizen Survey results September, October timeframe. NCS is right now in the process of launching the survey. It's owned by a new company now called Polco. They bought it in 2019, and so we had to do some sort of restarting in terms of contract and whatnot with them. We would like to have a council retreat in October. And what we'd like for that council retreat to be is a little more robust than what we normally do with the GIOs. We want to cover a couple of different topics. We want to talk about what we have, or what the results were from the National Citizen Survey. We want to talk about what we've been able to accomplish in the current GIO set. And then we want to talk about how we can transition that set of GIOs, much of which was sort of laying a foundation for action to come, into a new GIO set, adding a few new tasks that represent where we are today as a council and as a staff, a community, but also being aware we still got a lot of work to do to accomplish what was set out in this period. Then the final part of that is we'd really like to take the council through the process that the staff's been working on for the last 2 years in terms of the new vision and GIO set. We had our own retreat, we spent a day working on it, and we spent a tremendous amount of time trying to reinvent a public process that would be more engaging and allow us the avenue to test the concepts that came out of that staff retreat. And so we'd like to spend a full day with the city council covering these topics. That can be done a number of different ways. We can do a couple hours here, a couple hours there, 2 half days, whatever is most convenient for you, so that we can go over it really thoroughly. And then we would sort of get back on the regular path of presenting the GIOs to the public and then having the state of the city, which again, normally that would be a very public process. One of the things that we've been working on along with our new vision and GIO set was how to change the state of the city to be more engaging. And we had some really great plans that we were excited to see come together. But of course, they were all dependent upon in-person meetings here in the city, which may or may not be a possibility in November. So we need to sit down and really talk through what the mayor's vision is for that event and how we can sort of future-proof it for COVID-19 if we need to. I still think a lot of the things that we had planned could work out well in a virtual format, although not as exciting as it would be in person. And that's our summary.
The next GIO will go down with an asterisk, like
Yeah.
NBA. So, any questions for?
Yeah, I don't have any questions. Appreciate the update. Everything's pretty straightforward, and appreciate the work that the staff has done to get to this point thus far.
A couple items. The One-Stop Workforce Center, if you have any ink left in your COVID-19 delay.
Yeah.
Could use it there.
Could have put it there too? Okay.
Yeah. The National Citizen Survey, we know there's an attempt to keep the questions the same, so you can benchmark year over year, but we also know that several years ago they did add some different ones.
Yes.
Is there anything on the horizon that you know of that they're adding this year?
Well, so what we did last year that was a little bit different, and it was something that I felt like we needed to do, I say last year, but I meant last GIO period, is we added a whole series of questions geared toward testing the vision, which is something we had not done before. We took that vision statement that's fairly long, and we broke it into its components, and we asked the residents to respond, do you think we're here? How do you think we are in terms of governance and whatnot? And the responses were interesting. Most people responded felt like we had achieved at least various components of that vision, which just sort of validated that it was time to start thinking about the next horizon. That's really the only change we've made. One of the things that I think is important is most strategic planners would caution us doing a strategic planning exercise in the middle of an emergency because it dominates the conversation and it generally causes initiatives and goals to be set that maybe aren't in the interest long-term, but are certainly short-term concerns. And that's not the point of strategic planning. And so a lot of places have postponed strategic planning efforts. But one of the things that we talked about in the last period when we were developing those GIOs is that the city's process is unique, of course, in a lot of ways. One of those is our period of planning is very short. It's only 2 years, whereas most localities are at least 3, and many go as much as 5. So I think if we were in that category of a 3 to 5 year plan, I would be more concerned about taking this on right now at all. But given that it's only a 2-year window, I think that we will be able to walk through it professionally and come up with a series of goals that'll move us forward.
And then 2 more comments. If we could get more frequent updates, I think that would be good, so that it's not like every 2 years we look at the progress. And then also working, which I know you've been talking about, is how do we correlate with performance measures?
Yes.
In the dashboards, right?
Yes.
You're working on that.
Right, that's going to be a big component of what, I mean, so the staff itself had a plan on how to deal with this, performance measuring being a big component of it, because with the former city manager, we made some changes and they did or didn't work out right. And so we've sort of made up some ground there, but we still, I think as a staff, acknowledge there's a disconnect that needs to be fixed. What we had really hoped was that in June, we'd be able to kick off this process of developing the new vision and goal set, get that behind us, so that when we sat down to do GIOs, we'd be working from that new set of goals, and then we could better tie performance measures for the departments to what those goals are and the initiatives that are produced as a result. I still think that we can do that, and Barbara Dameron and I have talked about one of the major changes we need to make is when we sit down to do those department head reviews at budget time, we've got to make sure that we've got time built in to look at the performance measures at the same time. And that's a component that's currently missing.
Thank you.
No questions, comments?
2 very, very quick things from me. A lot what I'm planning to look at in going into the GIO process is some of the information that we had gotten from the 2018 projects. Would there be, or will there be soon, any indication on the ARB review guidelines and the Neighborhood Balance Committee and their ultimate recommendations?
Yeah, I think that we will not, I'll go out on a limb even though Carolyn's not here, we will not have the ARB review process completed by the time we have your retreat, nor will we have the neighborhood balance work completed. The good news is that on the Neighborhood Balance Committee, we were at the finish line when we had to stop meeting. We had finished all of our sort of cursory review, and we had a list of 19 strategies that committee now needs to review and determine which of those 19 are most important to put forward to City Council. We had designed a process for 3 meetings, 2 to sort of whittle that list down, and then 1 meeting where we present to City Council that recommendation, which is the end of the Neighborhood Balance Committee work. We hope that we can have a meeting of neighborhood balance in some fashion. We were holding out for an in-person meeting in September. If we can have that initial conversation about those 19 strategies and bring to the retreat at least some idea of what direction we might be going in. That would be better informed than just Carolyn and I giving you our impressions of where the committee might be most interested.
Okay. And then the second one is just a point, and it's on the commentary that we might see before the actual retreat and the actual adoption of the GIOs. Understand that the timelines have just been drastically changed, but if we're to see the National Citizen Survey right before that retreat and potentially not see ARB and Neighborhood Balance Committee, what their recommendations are, I would ask that we have an opportunity for the public to comment in some way that we can come up as being inclusive, that people are able to speak with, and certainly safe. But I think it'd be really helpful to have those comments and give people an opportunity to speak their mind as we go into adopting the next round of GIOs.
Yeah, I think that I was giving that some thought today, Caleb, since you mentioned it this morning, and I think there's a way that we can do that and have the information that's provided be constructive. My fear would be if we had a typical public process that generated a bunch of new concepts, people would be disappointed as we're not able to include them in a new goal set. But I think that we can sort of narrow that conversation a little bit to particular topics, as you say, ARB, neighborhood balance, and carry that forward to be helpful to you at the retreat.
I think it sounds wonderful. That's all.
So I think we've got a good path forward. Look forward to the October retreat. Should that be able to happen without fail.
And you should be prepared. We are, at least I am planning to have a few hands-on exercises at the retreat, so you can get to test out those new engaging public processes.
Good. Okay, so that takes us to, if nothing else on the GIOs, thank you, Mr. Trivett, takes us to item number 5, City Council Communications. I'll kick that off as a member of the Tourism Council. We had a new executive team elected. Jeff Wassmer decided to stay on as chair. Mr. Fleet at Clone Williamsburg is going to be the vice chair, and Ruth Larson will continue on as treasurer. Another little committee that I'm working on racial equity, kind of in partnership with Cliff Fleet at CW. We've held our second meeting. Those meeting notes came out. So we're kind of working on how to move forward. So I think it's a bold initiative for us to try to have this conversation. There's no end game set. We don't have any particular goals yet, but I look forward to sharing more with you all as that progresses. And then I've talked to you all, and there's some willingness to participate. So I appreciate that. So meetings or anything?
No, other than Mayor Pons did ask me to sit in on the meetings on the racial equity, and a lot of good conversation and really open and honest communication. So I look forward to at least being his alternate and participating in those meetings as well.
We had a school board liaison meeting on the 14th of July, and a lot of the discussion there was on communication and the path forward, which changed shortly thereafter to all online for 9 weeks, at least the first 9 weeks. And then I was on a virtual business council meeting, which was just to sort of kick off the new year. And on Wednesday, we'll have our EDA meeting.
2 of my 3 council appointments, the Virginians for High-Speed Rail and First Cities, have not met yet, but the Old Town Medical and Dental Center did welcome Aaron Thompson as our new executive director in our last meeting, and then a different committee that I sit on, but for City of Williamsburg functions, is the principles of naming and renaming at William and Mary, talking about how they may shift some of the names on campus, and there's been a lot of wonderful discussion. A fair amount is geared towards how do we engage the community and hear from them. So I know there's some interest in reaching out to the Neighborhood Balance Committee and others for recommendations or suggestions.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody's work out there in the community. I know it takes a lot of time, but it's important work. So that takes us now to schedule of meetings. Mr. Trivett?
Only one. Tomorrow at noon, I believe, will be the roundtable. I'm going to get this name wrong, but Dr. Mike Dacey, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Riverside Health Systems, will be the speaker, so it should be an interesting one. You can sign up online.
Good, thank you. So that leads us to open forum, which again is another opportunity for anybody to come forward. Mr. Stone, would you come forward, state your name and address for the record, please? Keep your comments to 5 minutes.
Is that it? Eric Stone, I live in James City County. Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council. I wasn't going to speak today, but great presentation that you did there, Chief Eagle, the staff. I think everybody's done a great job with the fire station. Credit to the former council for approving that second fire station. Mr. Trivett, you guys went back and looked at some things. There was a question that was asked, I can't remember who it was by, it may have been Mr. Maslin, about running 3 people with a paramedic or something like that on the engine. Is that what it was? again, I can appreciate you guys trying to build your personnel up to at least try to get up to NFPA recommendations. We all know that that's impossible, but at least you're trying to do that. One thing that I would suggest with the second fire station, as you build your people up, that may be an opportunity to run your ALS engine until you get enough staffing to staff a medic unit there. And that way, again, that's going to be some a cost savings there. Another thing, again, you can't not look at the response times over there. They were done. You guys approved it, and I'm not pointing at you, but you guys, all you guys worked on it, so you can't not look at those things. And Ms. Ramsey, when you're talking about everything that's going on up here in Midtown Road, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of construction and stuff going on up there, but there's a lot of new technology with fire suppression systems and all of that. You don't have a lot of that on that side of town. The EOC, I was fortunate to work for the city for 36 years. 28 of those years I spent living in the fire station. So I totally understand the condition of the station. In the EOC, I spent 7 years in there. A number of EOC activations. We have a really good EOC. And those of you who have been around and seen other departments, when they come and look at Williamsburg's EOC, we have a really, really nice EOC. So I'm going to kind of leave it at that. As you build your staffing, you could put 100 people in that new fire station over there. You're still going to run 4,600 calls. So why not have a second station where you can split some of that up? I would recommend, and again, you guys haven't made a decision, but I would recommend that you put all this on hold, go back and look at everything again, and come up with a good decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Thank you for your service to the city. Okay, item number 8, I believe we have something for closed session.
We do, Mr. Mayor. So I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments to boards and commissions.
Is there a second?
Second.
Malika, would you call the roll, please?
Aye.
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 Okay, we're going to take just a few minute break, head into closed session. As we come out, we'll then go into the Housing Authority meeting.